Chapter 263. As the group of mutated animals approached, Xiaoqing remained motionless and carefully sensed their auras. In the end, she determined that these wolves were around level 3. If there was no better choice, these wolves could completely satisfy Qin Zixi requirements. After confirming, Xiaoqing released the vines and called for the others to hide. The herd of cows seemed to have mad cow disease, running around wildly. What if they hurt someone? Erdi was the fastest. He picked up Little Bun and ran up a tree. Then the others also hid. Only Cheng'an's team was left standing there, confused. Little Bun quickly waved at Qin Zixi. Although Qin Zixi didn't understand what was going on, he followed his little friend when he saw him calling. Cheng'an trusted Xiaoqing's abilities, so he also hid. The group of people hid in the trees and soon saw this scene. The cows were running wildly, and there was a lot of dust. The wolves were eating the dust and chasing after them. Xiaoqing released the cows. The herd of cows looked quite pitiful. One of them had been almost killed, and there was still a bloody paw print on its butt. After the bull passed by, the vines suddenly drilled out of the ground like a giant net, trapping the wolves in the center. With her current strength, dealing with a few mutated beasts around level 3 was simply a piece of cake. A matter that was as easy as flipping her hand. There were sharp thorns on the vines. Once the vines caught the wolves, they quickly pierced their skin and injected poison. The wolves struggled for a while before they were completely paralyzed. They lay motionless in the net. Yan Qiyue and the others were used to Xiaoqing's strength. Although Cheng'an knew that Xiaoqing could lead someone like Gu Panpan, this was the first time he saw Xiaoqing's abilities. He couldn't help but walk over and poke the wolves in the net. He asked his question. Are these level 3 mutated wolves? Looking at their greenish-black fur and the green lightning mark on their foreheads that resembled Erlangshun's, one could tell that they should be wind-type mutated wolves. But how could a level 3 mutated wolf not even put up a fight before being wiped out in one go? It was literally catch them all in one fell swoop. Xiaoqing nodded and retracted the vines, leaving behind the 3 green wolves that were still twitching on the ground. She then said, 2 beginner level 3 and 1 mid-level 3. Their potential is not bad. At the very least, they won't have a problem growing to level 4. I've temporarily paralyzed them. Do you want to find a place to lock them up first? Qin Zixi was also a little stunned. How long had it been since they entered the forest? They only managed to capture 3 mutated beasts, and they were wolves with relatively high combat power among mutated beasts. More importantly, they didn't suffer any casualties, and they didn't even need to do anything. The little bun imitated Qin Zixi serious expression and rode on Erdi's neck. He reached out his little paw and stroked Qin Zixi's hair. Then he said, they look fierce. They're not as cute as Xiao Chui. Do you want to keep them? Qin Zixi nodded and waved at a beautiful girl beside her with an adorable look. The girl took out an iron cage out of thin air, and the other 2 paranormals moved the 3 wolves into the cage. Xiaoqing looked at Qin Zixi with a slightly deeper gaze. There were very few space paranormals. Because they didn't have the ability to protect themselves, many of them died in the early days of the apocalypse. The surviving space paranormals were in an awkward position in the base. Usually, when a powerful mercenary group went out on a mission, they would bring along a space paranormal. Chapter 264. After all, they had to find a place to store the materials they had plundered from the outside, as well as the things they had brought out. However, if the person with the ability to use space wasn't a close relative of the captain, it was inevitable that they would be suspected of embezzling the materials and the like. Therefore, paranormals with space were in an awkward position after the apocalypse. They were indispensable, but they were also suspected. However, Qin Zixi brought a paranormal with him when he went out, which was really bad. Besides, judging from the size of the cage, the paranormal space should be quite big. After all, he couldn't have brought only one cage with him. In addition to the cage, there should be many other things in his space. However, Xiaoqing just glanced at Qin Zixi. After catching the wolves, they had to set up camp on the spot. Even a paranormal with space power couldn't store living things in his space. They couldn't drag such a big cage forward, right? Therefore, Qin Zixi wanted to try to subdue the wolves. As long as he could subdue them, the wolves would listen to his orders. They wouldn't be a burden, and could even be helpful in the following journey. Therefore, they could only rest on the spot. They couldn't move forward until Qin Zishi subdued the wolves. Qin Zishi's power was very rare. At least, Xiaoqing hadn't seen another paranormal like him. During the process of setting up camp, Xiaoqing didn't stay on the spot. Instead, she carried the little bun and walked forward. Originally, they were going for a walk. Yiya had been trained to be very fierce. When it encountered small mutant animals, as long as the little bun gave the order, it would rush out. It didn't look like a rabbit at all, but more like a dog, pouncing on its prey. After walking for a short distance, Xiaoqing saw a small lake. It was more like a puddle than a lake. There might have been a fountain here a long time ago, and a lot of water gushed out from the ground. Later, the fountain was no longer active, but the puddle remained. The puddle was not small. Xiaoqing tried it, and found that it was half a person's height. The water was very clear, and she could see the soil and gravel at the bottom. There were no creatures in the water, only a few aquatic plants. Thus Xiaoqing was moved. She bit her fingertips and teased the surface of the water. She really wanted to go down and take a bath. After entering the forest, she had not taken a bath, so it was no wonder that when she looked at the pool of water, she was extremely moved. Xiaoqing thought about it carefully. There should be no one around except for the group of people, so as long as there was someone to keep watch, it would be relatively safe to take a bath. Thus, Xiaoqing gladly requisitioned Yiya. She threw Yiya out, then took out a carrot from her space and gave it to Yiya. If anyone comes near, remind me. If you do well, there will be carrots to eat tonight. Yiya stared at the carrot, almost drooling. It was only when Xiaoqing threw the carrot to it that it hugged the carrot, and happily rolled on the ground. It then said that if anyone came, it would bark. Xiaoqing was very satisfied. She took Little Bun and went into the water with him. Little Bun liked the water very much. His two little legs kicked in the water, and his whole body floated up and down. Xiaoqing had no choice but to support his chubby little, but so that he could maintain his balance in the water. Probably because of their physiques, the two of them did not have much dirt on them. They just enjoyed the feeling of soaking in the water. Especially Little Bun. He hugged Xiaoqing's neck and kept asking, "Mama, why don't you call Yiya over? I want to give Yiya a bath." Chapter 265. Xiaoqing glanced at him, then turned her face away seriously. But when she turned away, she glanced at him again. At this moment, Yan Qiuyue was already taking off his pants. He bent down to tug at the bottom of his pants. The white underwear wrapped around his buttocks, and because he bent down, a little of his groin was exposed. It was very erotic. Xiaoqing instantly became very serious. She turned her head and said, "Go ahead and shower. I'll be your lookout." Then she walked away. Yan Qiuyue was a little disappointed. Actually, he didn't want to shower. His original intention was to seduce Xiaoqing. However, when the Little Bun was around, Xiaoqing was too difficult to seduce. Thus, Yan Qiuyue hurriedly showered and got up. He put on his clothes, turned around a tall and strong tree, and saw Xiaoqing squatting on the ground and bullying Yiya. Poor Yiya. She was being bullied to the point of crying. Yan Qiuyue suddenly wanted to hug Xiaoqing from behind. He wanted to hug her slender waist and feel her slightly cold body temperature. Sometimes, Yan Qiuyue would also think, how did he fall in love with her? He was clearly such a selfish and heartless person. He could even be so ruthless to himself. How could he fall in love with a woman so wholeheartedly? Was it because she didn't discriminate against his special interests? Was it because of the gentleness under her indifferent mask when she faced him? It was both, but it wasn't. For some people, it was fate and also calamity. The moment he saw her, he gave his heart to her. Even someone like him couldn't escape from it. It was just that she was too good, so she attracted the attention of too many people. From Dai to Yan Hanqing, to Gu Chuan, and even Fu Jingma. Yan Qiuyue couldn't help but bite his fingertips. His eyes were a little red. God knew how much he wanted to kill all those who tried to get close to Xiaoqing. However, his rationality told him that he couldn't do that. The two thoughts crushed each other. Yan Qiuyue felt that he had already gone crazy. Perhaps love had this kind of magic that made him willing to suppress himself and do things for her that he would never do in the past. Unknowingly, Yenchiyue had bitten his fingertips until they were badly mangled. He quietly hit his fingertips, suppressed all the crazy thoughts in his heart, and leaned over. "Ah-ching, why don't we have roast rabbit tonight?" Yiya widened her eyes and looked at Yenchiyue. "Demon. Bastard." It actually instigated its master's mama to get rid of it. Xiaoqing picked up the rabbit's tail and said affectionately, "Since it's so useless, I'll eat it." Yiya immediately curled up into a ball, and whimpered while acting cute and pitiful to her master, begging for help. Little Bun pinched the rabbit's ears and said, "Mama, don't scare Yiya anymore. Look, it already knows its mistake." Yiya immediately hugged her paws and bowed pitifully and comically. Only then did Xiaoqing let her go and said, "Since we're all out, let's hunt some prey back and make dinner." Yenchiyue couldn't wait to spend more time with Xiaoqing, so he naturally wouldn't refuse. He pointed in a direction and said, "Let's go over there? The grass over there seems to be more lush." Xiaoqing nodded and led the 2 people and 1 rabbit over. They caught a lot of small prey back and threw them to the chef, Yin Hanqing, to handle. Unexpectedly, they also found a kind of walnut in the forest. However, after opening the shell, they found small black seeds that could be used as seasoning. Xiaoqing specially collected a lot of them to see if they could grow them when they went back. That way, they wouldn't have to worry about seasoning anymore. When it came to cooking, they ate separately. Yin Hanqing and the others had a portion, while Dai, Xiaoqing, and Little Bun had a separate portion. This was the food that Yenchiyue made after working tirelessly on it. It was food that could be digested by zombies. Although Xiaoqing could still only eat a small amount of food, she was very satisfied. More importantly, when there were so many people like Chang'an and the others, Xiaoqing wouldn't be easily exposed. Of course, what made Xiaoqing most satisfied was that she could eat now. She didn't have to watch others eat and then vomit. After all, Xiaoqing was still a normal person psychologically. She really couldn't accept a life of fasting. Especially if she didn't eat for a long time. She would feel that she was mentally abnormal. Yenchiyue's research was successful in a timely manner. He actually made a kind of medicinal powder. The main ingredients were the nuclei and bones of mutated animals, as well as some special mutated plants. Then when cooking, the powder would be mixed in. It would allow zombies to digest most of the food in their stomachs. The small portion that couldn't be digested would still need to be vomited out. While Yin Hanqing was processing the ingredients, Little Bun had already run to see his little friend. His little friend was still communicating with Green Wolf. His superpower seemed to be very powerful, as he could control more than 1 high-level mutated animal. However, the process of making it comfortable was very troublesome. Speaking of which, his superpower was also a spiritual power. The main thing was that he could communicate with mutated animals, and use his spiritual power to leave a mark in their minds. Only then could he control them. Therefore, during the process of taming mutated animals, Qin Zishi faced a certain degree of danger. For example, if the mutated animal's spiritual power was very high, it would oppress his spiritual power and damage it. If it was serious, he might even become an idiot or directly die. The second thing was that all mutated animals were very wild and aggressive. He needed to be very close to them in order to communicate with them. Then, during the process of communication, he would constantly use his spiritual power to stimulate and conquer them. In the end, he would be able to tame them. In short, strong power was always accompanied by high risks. Chapter 266. Xiao Chui was a very poisonous creature, but it was only level 2. So Qin Zishi was not very tired when he subdued it. But now, there were 3 mutated wolves in front of him, and each of them was at the same level as him. One could imagine the difficulty of subduing them. Qin Zishi started subduing a level 3 mutated wolf. This mutated wolf had been struggling, and its mental strength had not stopped for a moment. Qin Zishi struggled for a few hours, and his forehead was covered in sweat, but there was still no progress. He could not help but feel a little disappointed. In theory, he could subdue level 3 mutated animals, but why was there no progress at all? Young master is busy. You can't disturb him. A woman's gentle voice came from outside the door, and Little Bun's timid voice said, Can't I play with Brother Xiaoxi? I won't make trouble. Qin Zishi rubbed his head and said, Come in. He did not have any younger siblings since he was young, and Little Bun was very cute, so he especially liked Little Bun and doted on him like a younger brother. Little Bun ran in happily, and then saw a big wolf lying in front of Qin Zishi. Its claws were tied up, but it still looked very fierce. Little Bun sat obediently at the side, and then said softly, I won't disturb Brother Xiaoxi. Brother, are you going to raise this ugly wolf in the future? Qin Zishi tried his best to make his face look more serious, then patted Little Bun's head and said, Yes, brother will raise them in the future. Spicy, is it disobedient? Little Bun looked at the ropes on the wolf, then wrinkled his little nose and said fiercely, Mama, shrink the Spicy. If it's disobedient, beat it. If it's obedient, Spicy. Yaya was disobedient at that time, and then she was beaten up by Xiaoqing. Now she was very obedient. Qin Zishi laughed and did not take Little Bun's words seriously. He moved a small stool for him to sit at the side, and then continued to study. They could not stay here forever. He had to subdue these wolves as soon as possible and leave this lousy place. When Qin Zishi started communicating with the wolf using her spiritual power again, the Little Bun hugged Yaya and looked at the big wolf obediently. The wolf was extremely ferocious. It bared its white teeth and saliva continuously flowed out of its mouth. Its mental strength fluctuated violently. Little Bun immediately glared at the wolf. His black eyes seemed to have no white in them as he stared at the wolf. A ferocious aura exploded from Little Bun's body. Qin Zishi originally thought that the wolf's mental strength was like a thick barrier, preventing his mental strength from going any further. But suddenly, the barrier disappeared, and his mental strength went deep into the wolf's mental strength without any hindrance, leaving a simple imprint. Qin Zishi was stunned. He had been grinding for hours without any progress. How did he suddenly succeed? No matter what, this was a good thing. Qin Zishi opened his eyes and tried to send out an order. The wolf immediately lay on the ground and wagged its tail obediently. Qin Zishi heaved a sigh of relief. It was not a dream. He had really subdued it. In Qin Zishi's eyes, Little Bun was a lucky star. He succeeded as soon as Little Bun came, so Qin Zishi did not say anything and hugged Little Bun and kissed him. Little Bun was very shy, then pouted and kissed back. He said shyly, Brother Xiaoxi, are you spicy after you finish your business? Qin Zishi patted his head. Brother will play with you first. Chapter 267. Things were progressing smoothly here, and Xiaoqing had also successfully broken through to the pinnacle of level 4. Although it was called a breakthrough, it was actually a matter of accumulating a lot of energy. Now, she only needed a catalyst to break through to level 5. Xiaoqing originally thought that Qin Zishi would need at least 3 days to tame the 3 wolves, but he took less than a day. The next morning, he led the 3 wolves out in high spirits. I've named them Little 1, Little 2, and Little 3. Qin Zishi patted the wolf with the highest level, then asked Little Bun gently, Do you want to try riding it? Little Bun happily rode on the wolf. Xiaoqing couldn't help but sigh. Little Bun really forgot about his mother when he had a companion. Since Qin Zishi had already tamed the wolves, they continued moving forward. Actually, Qin Zishi was already satisfied with this trip, but since they were already here, it would be a pity to go back like this. What if they found a higher-level mutated animal that was more suitable for him? The wolf called Little One almost became Little Bun's personal mount. Little Bun was very happy sitting on it. Even Yaya, who had felt weak in the knees when she saw the big wolves, stood on the wolf's head valiantly. The group continued moving forward. After going deep into the forest for a certain distance, danger was everywhere, and the group became more and more vigilant. Xiaoqing was aiming for places where bears lived. According to the habits of bears, they looked for places where bears might live. They did indeed find a few bears, but unfortunately, the highest level was only level 2. Their combat power was a little low, and they were not suitable for Qin Zishi at all. Then for a few days they didn't find anything. On this day it suddenly rained. The rain wasn't light. At first, it was just dripping rain. Raindrops fell through the gaps between the branches and leaves, hitting Xiaoqing's face. She raised her head, and within a few seconds she felt the coldness of the rain. The rain tonight might be so heavy that they couldn't see if there were any beasts nearby. After all, the sound of the rain would cover a lot of other sounds. Xiaoqing and the others had no choice but to set up tents on the spot to shelter themselves from the wind and rain, and to keep warm. In short, there was no way to continue moving forward this afternoon. Probably because of the rain, the sky was completely dark around 4:30 in the afternoon. Dark clouds covered the earth. The clouds were like a black curtain, covering their faces. The weather in the post-apocalyptic world had always been strange. One second it was raining, and the next second the rain was mixed with hail. Xiaoqing had to use vines to cover their tent to prevent the hail or rain from collapsing the tent. Another more painful thing was that they could no longer sleep in their sleeping bags, or else they might become water bags. Xiaoqing could only hold the little bun in her arms and let him continue sleeping. The rain didn't stop for the whole night. It wasn't until 10 o'clock the next day that the weather slowly cleared up. When Xiaoqing lifted up the tent, she was stunned. The weeds on the ground were all blooming with small white flowers that spread far and wide. It was exceptionally beautiful. Because the ground was very wet, the soles of their feet were muddy when they stepped on it. Xiaoqing was still walking happily, especially when she saw those busy bees. Bees collected honey, and bears liked to steal honey. If they found a beehive, then if they were lucky, they might meet a bear. Because of the heavy rain, many snakes and insects were flushed out of their nests and laid across the road, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. Even a huge python was flushed out of a cave and curled up on the ground. Xiaoqing and the others didn't want to cause trouble, so they went around it. Chapter 268. Following the direction where the bees were flying, she could find the beehive. Then Xiaoqing discovered that it was the same kind of tree. On the branches, there were beehives. Due to the large number of beehives, they looked like fruits hanging from the tree. Then Xiaoqing did something bad. She secretly plucked a beehive and smashed it to get a lot of honey, filling a small bottle full of honey. Erdai almost got a bump on his head because of this. Xiaoqing and the others stayed nearby for the time being, waiting for bears to come and steal the honey, so that they could catch them directly. Although this was a bit like waiting for rabbits to appear, it was already a very irrational choice to continue going deeper. No one knew what was in the depths of the forest. Instead of taking the risk, it was better to wait for a while. It would be best if they could catch a mutant bear, but if they couldn't, they could just leave the forest. Anyway, Qin Zixi's harvest this time was enough to satisfy him. Xiaoqing even planned to pluck all the beehives and drink the honey when they left, regardless of whether they could catch a bear or not. As expected, they didn't meet a bear. Instead, they met some small mutant animals. Although Qin Zixi was a little unwilling, they still had to return. 3 wolves opened up the path. Their auras were extremely fierce and were best used to open up a path. Usually mutant animals with some brains wouldn't provoke them. Those without brains were usually weaker and didn't dare to provoke the powerful wolves. Little Bun rode on the wolf and had a lot of fun. There was a saying that went, "An unintentional willow grows a shade." They sincerely wanted to find a high-level mutant bear, but they didn't find one and had already given up. When they were about to return, they met a bear. The situation at the time was like this. Because it had been raining for several days, the ground was wet. Basically, after an entire day, the soles of their shoes could be covered with more than 10 centimeters of soil. Little Bun carried a jar of honey and rode on the wolf with Yiya, followed by Xiaoqing. When they stopped for lunch at noon, Little Bun put the honey on the ground, but when he came back after lunch, where did the honey go? The jar full of honey was almost empty. Little Bowsy was more stubborn. He grabbed the person and asked, "Did you steal my honey?" Little Bun felt a little wronged that he couldn't find an answer after asking around. Then he blinked and saw a tail peeking out from behind the tree. The round, bulbous tail looked very cute. Little Bun couldn't help but pull it. It felt very good to the touch. Then he pulled the bear out from behind the tree. The bear was sleeping soundly after eating, waiting for you, but its tail was almost pulled off by someone. It howled and poked its head out from behind the tree, wanting to see who had the guts to pull its tail. Then she saw the little bun. Little Bun was also dumbfounded. He had only seen a cute soft gray ball, and then he had grabbed a big black bear. The contrast was too great. Little Bun cried out and almost cried. On the other hand, Yaya was very loyal. Her first reaction was to jump up and kick the bear's face. The bear was caught off guard and was kicked to the ground by a rabbit. The sound of the bear landing was very loud and immediately attracted Xiaoqing's attention. When Xiaoqing saw this scene, she was scared out of her wits. Her little baby was sitting in front of the bear, looking at the big bear pitifully. Xiaoqing ran over without a word. She picked up the little bun and heaved a sigh of relief. Chapter 269. The bear was actually very innocent. After it ate the honey, it was so satisfied that it wanted to find a place to take a nap. It wanted to see if another jar of honey would appear in front of it when it woke up. Then its tail was pulled. The bear was in so much pain that it cried out and woke up. Before it could see clearly who pulled its tail, it was kicked to the ground by a rabbit. There were so many twists and turns. After Xiaoqing picked up the little bun, she released the vines. This time she couldn't trap the bear. The bear's fur was very thick. The thorns couldn't pierce through it at all, let alone inject the poison. More importantly, the bear was very strong. It stood up and the vines tied to its body broke one after another. The vines were very strong. Xiaoqing had used them to trap countless zombies and mutated animals, but the bear broke them easily. Fortunately, they were made of energy and wouldn't be damaged. Otherwise, Xiaoqing's heart would ache. Xiaoqing's heart was full of the little bun. She was worried that the little bun was hurt. In her anxiety, she took out a green fruit from her space and stuffed it into the bear's mouth. The bear was looking around slowly when the fruit filled its mouth. It chewed slowly. It tasted sour and a little sweet. Then it collapsed. Xiaoqing wasn't in the mood to care about it. She quickly checked the little bun's body to see if he was hurt. She checked inside and out several times. When she didn't find any injuries, she heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, Xiaoqing finally reacted. Wasn't there a bear just now? The bear lying on the ground. She didn't know what she had stuffed into the bear's mouth. The bear was lying on the ground, looking like it was asleep. Xiaoqing touched the bear's head. When she didn't see any reaction, she grabbed the bear's paw and dragged it back. The people who were cooking and waiting for their food. I went out for a stroll, and actually brought back a bear. Xiaoqing's expression was also a little strange. She felt that Qin Zixi life was really too good. He had always wanted a bear with thick skin that could be used as a meat shield. Then, when they were about to leave the forest, a bear delivered itself to their doorstep. Was Qin Zixi really not God's illegitimate child? Peak level 3. Do you want to subdue it? Xiaoqing asked with a strange expression. Qin Zixi's expression was also a little sluggish. After a while he said, okay. However, there was no need to rush to tame the bear. They had to eat first. After the meal, Qin Zixi turned around to take a look. Her face was about to crack. The bear had been sleeping on the ground, but now its aura had suddenly become unstable. There was also a thick earthy yellow light shining continuously. It was clearly about to break through. Who had seen a captive about to break through at such a critical moment? Not only Qin Zixi, but even Xiaoqing felt that Qin Zixi was really lucky this time. Once this bear broke through, it would become a level 4 mutated animal. With the strength of a level 4 mutated bear and Qin Zixi's intelligence, it would be almost invincible among those of the same level. Even someone like Xiaoqing, who was at the peak of level 4, wouldn't dare to face Qin Zixi directly. Xiaoqing was silent for a long time. Then she said, hurry up and subdue it. When it evolves to level 4 and wakes up, it will be very difficult for you to subdue it again. Qin Zixi knew that now wasn't the time to be polite, so he took the bear back. Thus, they could only set up camp. As soon as Xiaoqing returned to the tent, she immediately took out a green fruit from her space. This fruit was the one she had stuffed into the bear's mouth before. This was an unexpected harvest from the last time they were in the forest. She had kept both the vine and the fruit. Later on, some things happened that caused her to forget about this fruit. If it weren't for the fact that she had stuffed one into the bear's mouth, Xiaoqing would have completely forgotten about it. Was the bear's evolution related to this fruit? Xiaoqing called Yan Qiyu over to let a professional check if this green fruit was poisonous. After a careful examination, Yan Qiyu found that not only was the fruit not poisonous, but it also contained rich energy. Without hesitation, Xiaoqing called Dai over and stuffed one into his mouth. Dai was the weakest among them now. Although Dai couldn't speak, Xiaoqing could feel that Dai was sullen, which was why she had thought of giving the fruit to Dai first. Xiaoqing was worried that the whole fruit was too strong and that it might have side effects, so she first cut the skin of the fruit and squeezed out the juice. She diluted it with water and gave it to Dai to drink. If Xiaoqing gave Dummy something, even if it was poison, he would drink it. After Dummy drank a cup of diluted juice, his eyes brightened. A feeling of being close to a breakthrough broke out from his body. Dummy should have used the energy accumulated for a long time to fill the crystal nucleus, so that he could proceed to the next step of the breakthrough. However, Dummy broke through just like that. He licked his lips, still wanting more. This breakthrough was too easy, and he didn't feel tired like he usually did. He just stared blankly for a while, and then broke through. Xiaoqing didn't say anything and gave him a few more cups of juice. However, the effect of the second cup wasn't as good as the first. After Dai drank the juice from the whole fruit, he broke through to the mid-stage of level 3. But this was already very scary. If it weren't for this fruit, he might have needed a few months to reach his current level. Yan Qiyu watched the whole process. Then he asked quietly, "How many of these fruits are left?" Xiaoqing counted and said with a pained expression, "One was eaten by the bear, and one was eaten by Dai. Now there are 4 left." If she had known that the fruit was so effective, she wouldn't have given it to the bear. At that time, she was muddle-headed. She was afraid that the bear would bite Little Bun. So she casually took out something to bet on its mouth. Yan Qiyu had a headache. How should he divide the 4 fruits? Chapter 270. At that time, there were piles of bones under the vines. It seemed that many mutated animals had died there. Xiaoqing guessed that the nuclei of those mutated animals had been absorbed by the vines. That was how the fruits were formed. Then there was a reason why the fruits could improve people's superpowers. It was simply a condensed form of nuclei. It was very difficult to find such a good thing. Xiaoqing had to hold on to the idea that she would not have the idea of distributing them after this time. Dummy had already eaten one, so he could be excluded. She could not favor the rest of the companions, could she? Therefore, the remaining 4 fruits had to be distributed equally. The rest of her friends were Gu Chuan and his sister, Yan Qiyu, Yan Hanqing, Xiaotong, her and Little Bun. There were 7 of them in total. Oh, there's also a Yaya. If the fruits were distributed equally, they could be divided into 2 halves. Although the effect would be less, everyone could have a share. Xiaoqing thought for a while and turned the 4 fruits into juice. Then, she divided them into 8 cups and let Yan Qiyu distribute them. She gave the juice to Little Bun and Yaya first. After watching them break through, she drank the juice herself. Now that Little Bun was already at level 3, and even Yaya was a level 4 mutated rabbit. If anything happened, they would have the ability to protect themselves, and Xiaoqing felt more at ease. After drinking the juice, Xiaoqing took out a lot of crystals and held them in her palm. In case something happened, or she was about to break through but didn't have enough energy, these crystals could be used to support her temporarily. Actually, she was already on the verge of breaking through. She only needed a little help to break through this barrier, and she could break through to level 5. The fruits came at the right time. Xiaoqing quietly felt the surging power in her body. She clenched her fist. Power was a good thing, especially in this post-apocalyptic world. You could be unreasonable, but you couldn't be without a fist. Otherwise, don't even talk about protecting your family. You won't even be able to save your own life. Xiaoqing was very calm. Ever since she obtained her special ability, she had broken through several times. She could be considered to be very experienced. When the surging power surged up, she used her remaining mental strength to guide the energy in her body towards the crystal nucleus. When the turbulent energy came out of the crystal core, its volume would be smaller. After a few hundred times, all the energy was absorbed by the crystal core. Xiaoqing could clearly feel that an invisible barrier had been broken. The crystal core would usually only grow slowly, but now it had suddenly increased in size. The crystal core that was supposed to be a multi-sided rhombus seemed to have become a lot rounder. Xiaoqing had broken through. She felt the energy surging in her body for a while. Then she opened her hand, and vines with endless vitality grew out. Originally, the vines were emerald green in color. Only the thorns on top were darker green. Now, the vines were as thick as a baby's arm. The whole body was dark green, as if it was carved out of black jade. It looked very fragile, like a fragile crystal. In fact, whether it was its toughness or toxicity, it had greatly increased. This was only one of Xiaoqing's gains. Her biggest gain was that she had a deeper understanding of space. Also, her small space had expanded in size. In short, there were many benefits. For a long time in the future, she probably wouldn't be able to break through. After all, from level 5 to level 6, it would take a long time to accumulate. After relaxing her body, Xiaoqing walked out. When she opened the curtain, she saw a group of people standing at the door. They were all staring at the tent attentively. Xiaoqing was shocked. Chapter 271. What are you doing? Yin Qiyue's expression was a little strange. Qing, you haven't come out for a day and a night. If you didn't come out, I would have gone in to have a look. I broke through. Xiaoqing was in a good mood. She patted Yin Qiyue's shoulder and said, "That's why it took me a little longer. What about you?" "I'm at level 4 now." Yin Qiyue couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. His level 4 power was much more powerful than that of ordinary paranormals. After all, his power was very strong. "I'm at level 4 too," Yin Hanqing said. Then Gu Chuan, who had been silent for a long time, said, "Me too." Apart from them, Xiao Tong and Gu Panpan were now only one step away from level 4. It was estimated that they would break through soon. Even so, it was still very scary. Level 2 paranormals were the mainstream, level 3 paranormals were experts, and level 4 paranormals could be counted on one's fingers. However, in a paranormal team of less than 10 people, there were actually 4 level 4 paranormals and a level 4 mutated animal. Among the rest of the paranormals, the weakest was at least level 3. It would scare people to death if they knew about it. Moreover, among the level 3 paranormals, there was Little Bun, who was young and had great potential. There was also a psychic paranormal, which was very rare. Only Gu Panpan's paranormals were more common, but a strength-based paranormal like her was also very powerful. This team of paranormals was enough to defeat most mercenary groups. Xiaoqing was even confident that she could challenge one of the top 4 mercenary groups in the capital. Xiaoqing breathed a sigh of relief. Ever since the apocalypse, her heart had been in her throat. She was afraid that one day she would wake up and find that everything was just a dream. And she was lying in a pool of blood, watching the car that caused the accident speeding away. Even though this thought had faded away day by day, Xiaoqing didn't relax. Strength, strength, strength. Without enough strength, one could only be at the mercy of others in an environment like the apocalypse. Until today, she suddenly found that her friends were very powerful. Their strength had already stood at the top of the paranormals in the country. Only then did she feel relieved. "Where's Qin Zishi? How is he?" After relaxing, Xiaoqing suddenly remembers the important matter. If Qin Zishi can't tame the bear, a level 4 mutant bear will not be easy to deal with. Hearing his friend's name, Little Bun was the first to react. "He's playing with Bear Bear." Yin Qiyue hurriedly continued. "He's very lucky. He's already tamed that bear. After taming it, that bear broke through to level 4. He's so happy that he can't even keep a straight face." The strength of her companions had all increased by a level, and the employer was also satisfied. The mission this time could be considered to have been completed successfully. Xiaoqing was very satisfied. She brought people to discuss with Qin Zishi about returning. Qin Zishi was teasing the bear. The bear was very simple and honest. When he teased it, it rolled on the ground. When it was not baring its big white teeth, this bear was quite cute. Just as Yin Qiyue said, Qin Zishi couldn't keep a straight face. His face, which was always serious, couldn't help but smile. A pair of small dimples appeared as he smiled. With some baby fat, He was even cuter than the bear. He had already gotten what he wanted the most, so he naturally agreed to go back. Therefore this time, even their speed was much faster. Only Chang'an wanted to cry. He originally thought that they would encounter some danger this time, or that there would be something that required his help. In the end he won by lying down all the way. It was like he didn't exist at all. It wasn't until they were almost at the base that Chang'an realized that he had come this time to get paid. Chapter 272. The closer they got to the base, the more unhappy Little Bun became. He and Qin Zishi got along very well. Although there was a big age gap between them, Qin Zishi treated him very well. There was no generation gap between them, and they could play together. It could be said that they had formed a deep friendship. Then Xiaoqing told him that they would be separated when they returned to the base, because Qin Zishi was not from S-City base. Sooner or later, she would leave. Little Bun was especially unhappy. This was the first time he had such a strong desire to keep his little friend. But no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't think of a good idea. If he wanted to keep his little friend, he could only make him his family. Little Bun bit his finger and could not help but secretly ask Qin Zishi, "Brother Xiaoxi, do you like my mama?" Qin Zishi and the bear were inseparable these 2 days, except when they went to the toilet. At this moment he was feeding the bear. Hearing Little Bun's words, the pure Qin Zishi's first reaction was that Little Bun was talking about the affection between friends. It meant that he had a good impression of her, so she nodded. "I do." Xiaoqing had outstanding abilities, was beautiful, and was not bad-tempered. This mission was so perfect because of her. How could he not like her? Little Bun laughed immediately. "I told you that my mama is so beautiful. No one would dislike her." After getting Qin Zishi's approval, Little Bun began to secretly plan a way to make Qin Zishi his family. Then they could eat together, sleep together, and live together. His little friend would never leave him again. Great! Xiaoqing didn't know about Little Bun's plan. She was trying her best to adapt to her level 5 ability. After breaking through to level 5, her strength had doubled. It didn't feel like she had broken through one level, but many levels. The 5th level was like a threshold. After breaking through, both the amount and quality of the energy in the body would be greatly improved, not to mention the improvement in speed, physical strength, and strength. Xiaoqing needed a short time to adapt to better control her current strength. Not only her, but the other little friends were also adapting to their own strength. After all, if one didn't know how to use a greater power, it would be a waste of a heavenly treasure. It would be like a child who had obtained a treasured sword. In the process of adapting, they returned to the base. When they reached the gate of the base, Xiaoqing felt that something was wrong. When they got closer, they found that many cars were parked outside the base, and many injured people were getting out of the cars. Xiaoqing could not help but get out of the car and ask the guard at the gate, "What's going on?" The guard knew Xiaoqing. He had seen the bet between Xiaoqing and Chang'an, so he was very nice to Xiaoqing. "Didn't our base send some people to escort those researchers to the capital? Something happened. I don't know why, but it seems like it was premeditated. They were surrounded by a crowd of zombies. Now all the bases have received the news and are sending people to rescue them. These injured people are from the last batch. More than 100 people went, but less than half of them came back." Xiaoqing could not help but frown. Those researchers were going to the capital to carry out important research projects, but now they were surrounded by a crowd of zombies. They might suffer a great loss, which was a great disadvantage for human beings. Moreover, the crowd of zombies would take the initiative to surround human beings, which meant that the zombies had evolved a lot during this period. They might have a higher IQ and started to target human beings. Chapter 273. That was really bad news. The gatekeeper said, "There were a lot of zombies surrounding those researchers, and their levels weren't low. I heard that several nearby bases had sent people to rescue them, but the casualties were heavy. Only half of the paranormals who went came back. Among the half, many of them were injured. Those with minor injuries are fine, but those with broken arms and legs, how are they going to survive in the future? What should we do next? Did the base release any other information?" Xiaoqing asked again. The gatekeeper sighed and said, if we don't send enough people, we'll be dead meat. So our base chief and the base chiefs of other bases had a meeting, and then issued a task. Those who are willing to participate in the rescue can sign up. When there are enough people, we'll go to the rescue. But I'm afraid that those researchers won't be able to wait until we can wait until then. If they waited until there were enough people to go to the rescue, those researchers might have already become rotten meat in the stomachs of zombies. Now many people have volunteered to go to the rescue. The gatekeeper touched his nose and said, but there are too few people, I'm afraid. Xiaoqing's brows were tightly furrowed as she brought her partners into the base. Qin Zishi was quite a nice person. He had just entered the base and had yet to gain a firm foothold. But he had already paid all the rewards to Xiaoqing and Cheng'en. In fact, because Xiaoqing had indeed helped him a lot this time, he even gave her an extra reward. Cheng'en wasn't jealous. After all, Xiaoqing's gains were proportional to her efforts. It could even be said that he had freeloaded all the way here. He received a reward for nothing and didn't have to do anything. What was there to be dissatisfied about? Xiaoqing took the reluctant little bun and said goodbye to them. Before leaving, Xiaoqing specially asked Qin Zishi, may I ask where your home is? When are you going back? Qin Zishi didn't hide anything from her friends who had battled with her. My home is in the capital. I'm going back in 2 days. Is there anything you need? Qin Zishi didn't bring the 4 pets back, because he was worried that his pets would cause panic when they entered the base. Moreover, he couldn't stay in the base for more than a few days. Instead, he let them live outside the base. He was also worried that his pets would be killed by an unknown paranormal, so it was better to leave as soon as possible. It's like this. I'm going to participate in the rescue of that researcher. I'll probably set off tomorrow. If it's on the way, we can go together. Xiaoqing chuckled. When Qin Zishi heard this, he knew that Xiaoqing wanted to protect him again. After all, Xiaoqing's strength was obvious. When she said that she wanted to go with him, she was just being modest. She probably only mentioned it for the sake of little Bun. Qin Zishi didn't say anything and showed a pair of small dimples. I can go whenever I want. Since you're going to participate in the rescue tomorrow, I'll go tomorrow too. I'm already worried about leaving Ada and the others outside. Okay. Let's meet at the square tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. Xiaoqing agreed. The little Bun immediately cheered happily. He had been thinking about making Qin Zishi his family along the way, but he didn't have a chance to do it. Now that Mama was going to go with Qin Zishi, he finally had a chance. In fact, Xiaoqing didn't want to see the little Bun depressed. On the other hand, she wanted to return Qin Zishi's favor. After all, she took more than the reward from Qin Zishi. Because they only had 1 night to rest, Xiaoqing moved quickly. She first went to buy some fresh fruits and vegetables, then organized the space. Now that the space had expanded a little, she could put more things in it. After thinking about it, Xiaoqing put some things that she might use on a daily basis into the space, then went to sleep with the little Bun and the others. The next morning, Qin Zishi took the initiative to come to Xiaoqing's house. At this time, Xiaoqing and the others were still eating, so they invited Qin Zishi to eat with them. Xiaotong always liked almonds, so Yan Hanqing specially made some almonds for her as a snack. After breakfast, they set off again. Originally, the rescue mission was organized by the base, and they needed to gather a group of people before they set off. Xiaoqing didn't want to wait, and there would be more trouble if there were more people, so she directly took the team and left. Without Cheng'an's team, half of the members were gone. The little Bun specially invited Qin Zishi to play in his car. Soon after they left the base, Qin Zishi summoned the bear named Heibao, Ada Aer and Asan. 1 bear and 3 wolves ran behind the car. Those who didn't know better would think that they were being chased by mutated animals. When Qin Zishi got into Xiaoqing's car, he realized that the people sitting in the back seat were playing Fight the Landlord. He froze for a moment before he heard Gu Panpan call out to him. Lil Shi, do you want to come and play with us? Qin Zishi hesitated for a moment. His family was very good, and he went to a private school when he was young, so he had never been exposed to such down-to-earth poker games. Therefore, Qin Zishi was a little itchy. After the little Bun called him once, he couldn't help but join in the game. After about half an hour, Xiaoqing turned around and saw that except for Gu Chuan, everyone's faces were covered with notes. So energetic. Xiaoqing smiled silently and turned her head back. She was sitting in the middle seat, leaning against the air die, and Yin Chiyue was still massaging her legs. Her life was so rotten. Especially when Yin Hanqing and Yin Chiyue were together. They specially made a lot of snacks for her. This greatly satisfied her. After a while, Xiao Tong would pass her snacks. Yin Hanqing's hands were very skillful. He also made a lot of biscuits with animal heads for the little bun, which made the little bun very satisfied. Chapter 274. When they were together, their life was not like that of the post-apocalyptic world. Qin Zishi was rich. Even in the post-apocalyptic world, he lived a comfortable life. As for Xiaoqing, she brought a set of kitchen utensils, seasonings, fruits and vegetables with her. Would she let herself live a bad life? Especially when the two groups of people were together, they were rotten to the core. Their life was like heaven. There was Yin Hanqing, who was more professional than a professional chef, and Qin Zishi provided the best ingredients. Other than that, Qin Zishi had many fruits and vegetables that were common before the post-apocalyptic world, but rarely seen after the apocalyptic world. The girl with the space beside him was like a moving warehouse filled with all kinds of things, such as lychees, grapefruits, oranges, bayberries, pineapples. Qin Zishi had almost all of them in stock, not to mention vegetables and the like. At the beginning, Xiaoqing was unwilling to take advantage of Qin Zishi. After all, brothers had to settle accounts clearly. Moreover, she and Qin Zishi were just friends who had just met. Therefore, Xiaoqing bought all the fruits that her friends wanted to eat but did not have. Qin Zishi was angry about this. He thought that he treated Xiaoqing and the others as friends, but Xiaoqing wanted to fob him off with money. However, Qin Zishi was born in an aristocratic family. He was not stupid. He understood Xiaoqing's thoughts. Therefore, he gave Xiaoqing more money every time they traded. He called it a treat for Little Bun. As for the 3 meals, most of the vegetables were provided by Qin Zishi. When it came to this, he refused to accept the crystals no matter what. Qin Zishi said that the dishes were for everyone to eat together, not him. Xiaoqing had to take care of him and keep this favor in mind. If there was a chance in the future, she would return this favor. This was how friendships usually developed. Moreover, although Qin Zishi was a little young and had a good family background, she was neither arrogant nor rash. She was quite lovable. Of course, the most important thing was that this was a world where appearances mattered. Therefore, after spending a few days alone together, Qin Zishi had already gotten along well with Xiaoqing's teammates. The more it was like this, the more reluctant Little Bun was to part with Qin Zishi. He was even more determined to make Qin Zishi his family. Don't you see that Aunt Panpan and the rest also like Qin Zishi? They would definitely be very willing to accept Qin Zishi as their family. Little Bun clenched his little fists and quickly formed a plan in his mind. The only thing missing now was for Qin Zishi and Xiaoqing to be alone together. Otherwise, Yin Chiyue, the big bad guy, would definitely come out to stop them. Soon, they approached the place where the researchers were surrounded. These researchers were quite lucky. There was a reservoir nearby with a lot of fish. In order to prevent people from fishing, the person in charge of the reservoir specially surrounded it with a layer of iron net. After they were chased, they entered the reservoir. Several superpowered people with wood power planted a lot of poisonous vines on the iron net to form the first protective wall. Some superpowered people with earth power also strengthened the house and built a second layer of earth wall to form the second protective wall. Therefore, relying on these 2 protective walls, they were not torn apart and eaten by the zombies for a while. However, if it went on like this, they would be drowned by the tide of zombies sooner or later without water and food, and their supplies would be constantly consumed by the tide of zombies. Everyone in the reservoir couldn't sleep at night. They sent out signals for help while thinking of all kinds of ways to disperse the zombie crowd. Chapter 275. Originally, they had developed a kind of liquid that smelled good to humans. Once zombies smelled it, they would feel nauseous and leave voluntarily. They had come all the way from the south, and this liquid had saved their lives several times. However, this kind of liquid had no effect on the tide of zombies this time. Every zombie was staring at them fiercely, with no intention of leaving at all. Facing this situation, the researchers were completely panicked. There had been a rescue mission before. 200 to 300 people had come from several bases. These researchers and the remaining guards had wanted to take the opportunity to break out of the encirclement, but in the end, they did not make it out. Many of them had died, and more than half of the rescue team had died. What was more frightening was that they had found some very special zombies. These zombies had mixed in the tide of zombies. Judging from their appearance, they looked very much like humans. Only a part of them still retained the characteristics of zombies. Except for the fact that they couldn't speak, they looked no different from humans in terms of appearance. This made the rescue team even more panicked. Had zombies evolved to such a level? That was why those bases didn't dare to send a second wave of people to rescue them immediately. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a rescue mission but a suicide mission. According to their preliminary guess, those zombies that looked like humans were likely to be at least level 4 zombies. There might even be level 5 zombies. When Xiaoqing arrived with her people, she saw many people wandering around nearby. They should be the scouts from each base, who had come to observe the situation. When she arrived, Xiaoqing hadn't expected that there would be so many zombies here. Just looking at the sea of corpses and moving heads, it was already very scary. The rotten smell of the zombies gathered together could be carried for 3 miles with the wind. Even if they were far away, it was still nauseating. Not far from the reservoir, there was an observation point set up by the bases. Xiaoqing led her people there. Before she arrived, Xiaoqing said, "Since we've come all the way here, it's time to part ways. I wish you a safe trip and return to the capital soon." Qin Zishi was very calm. "Who said I'm leaving? If I'm leaving, I'll take those researchers with me." He must have thought about this for a long time, or he wouldn't have said it so calmly. As soon as Qin Zishi spoke, the girl with no space beside him immediately said, "Young master, it's too dangerous here. You'd better go home." Xiaoqing also said, "She's right. You should go home first. You can't change the current situation on your own. If you stay here for too long, your family will definitely be worried." Qin Zishi's expression was very serious. Her chubby little face was scrunched up into a ball. "I decided to stay after careful consideration." "You don't have to persuade me, especially you, Sister Qing. You're already staying. So why do you have to ask me to leave?" There were 2 reasons why he didn't leave. First, his friends were all going into danger, and he couldn't go home alone to enjoy the peace and security. Secondly, he was also a citizen of the Celestial Empire. In the past, when he was weak, he could not do anything. Now that he was a level 3 paranormal and encountered such a situation, he naturally had to do something for the country. Of course, the first reason was more important. Xiaoqing patted his head and said, "I don't want to nag you, but the current situation is really not suitable for you to be involved. Go home quickly. If there's a chance, I'll take the little bun to see you." Qin Zishi widened his eyes and said angrily, "I'm already 17 this year. In a few months, I'll be 18. I'm not a child anymore. I know what I'm doing. Don't worry, Sister Qing, I won't be a burden to you." Chapter 276. Xiaoqing didn't want him to stay at all. This kid always claimed that he was almost 18 years old, but in fact he was only 16 years old. His nominal age was 17, and he hadn't experienced much. It was too dangerous for him to get involved. Qin Zishi had a stubborn temper and refused to leave no matter what. Hence, they were in a deadlock, and Xiaoqing had no choice but to take him to the observation point to settle him down. The staff stationed in S City base in the observation point was having a headache. When he saw Xiaoqing and others come in, he quickly asked, "Has the rescue team sent by the base arrived?" Xiaoqing shook her head. "The base is still recruiting people. They shouldn't be here for a while. We came here spontaneously. What's the situation now?" The man's eyes darkened and he was a little disappointed, but he still forced himself to be spirited and said, "I've contacted the people inside. They can still hold on for a few days, but there's not much food left. After all, when they came out, They didn't bring much food, only enough to reach the capital. When they were besieged before, they lost part of it. Now there's less than a day's worth of food left. We're trying to find a way to transport the food in. With food, they should be able to hold on for 2 more days. As long as they can hold on for a few more days, they may be able to hold on until the base's rescue. But our food can't be sent in. Those zombies prevent anyone who tries to get close. We once tried to let people with space power sneak in with food. As a result, a high-level mutant zombie jumped out. Even the space power man couldn't come out alive. Another staff member added with a wry smile. Xiaoqing frowned and asked in a low voice, "So now, is there any food?" "Yes." The staff member lifted the tarpaulin. There were all kinds of dry food under it. Although the dry food was not delicious, it could fill the stomach and save the lives of the people inside. "Let me try." Xiaoqing thought for a long time and then said. Her physique was different. Although at the beginning, she had felt endless distress because of this physique, later, she felt more and more that her zombie-like physique had great benefits. For example, now she wouldn't be attacked by zombies, so she could bring in all the food. The staff member was stunned and hesitated. After all, he didn't know Xiaoqing's identity. What if she ran away with the food? This was the first reason. The second reason was that if Xiaoqing was not strong enough and died in the zombie crowd, wouldn't they lose a lot of food? He didn't want Xiaoqing to die in vain. Xiaoqing just showed the badge of a paranormal in the S-City survivor base and said, "I have a special ability that can make the zombies not attack me for a short time. Let me have a try. I can't just watch them starve to death." The staff discussed and agreed. Looking at the situation, it would take a long time for the rescue team to arrive. By the time the rescue team arrived, the people inside would starve to death before they were eaten by the zombies. They didn't have any other way to bring the food in. It was better to trust Xiaoqing this time. The only problem now was how to bring the food in without exposing her space. Qin Zishi was very considerate. He patted his chest and said, "Sister Qing, I'm a space paranormal. I'll lend you my space paranormal. I wish you success." Xiaoqing was very happy about his trust. She looked at the thin girl and said, "Don't worry. I'll bring her back safely." After the discussion, it was decided that Xiaoqing, Dai, and the space paranormal named Lan would go in together. The more people there were, the more cumbersome it would be. Chapter 277. As for Dai as a zombie, he would not be attacked and could even help them. After confirming the people going in, Lan put all the food into her space and was carried by Xiaoqing. After all, she was only a little stronger than ordinary people, but she did not have any other ability to protect herself. Once she entered the zombie crowd and was separated from Xiaoqing, she would die. Therefore, Xiaoqing directly carried Lan on his back. She was going to let Dai carry her, but Dai, who was always obedient, suddenly lost his temper and refused to touch Lan, making the scene very awkward. Xiaoqing had no choice but to carry Alan on his back. Due to the lack of time, Xiaoqing only told a few men to take good care of Little Bun and the others, and then resolutely entered the zombie crowd. When approaching the zombie crowd, Lan was a little scared and her body tightened. Soon she found a very strange thing. All the zombies acted as if they did not see them. Occasionally, 1 or 2 zombies would turn around and stare at her, and when they approached, Dai would glare at them and run away. Lan was stunned. Since the end of the world, she had never seen such a scene. People were afraid of zombies, but zombies were not afraid of people. The deeper they went, the more zombies there were. Many zombies smelled the scent of living people and turned their heads towards Lan. Dai immediately bared his big white teeth and stared at those zombies fiercely. Dai was close to the high level of level 3. Although there were many level 3 zombies in this zombie crowd, Dai was born with a fierce aura. Ordinary zombies would avoid him when they saw him. Moreover, Xiaoqing was at level 5, so no zombies would dare to come over. However, the deeper they went, the more Xiaoqing found that something was wrong. Although most of the zombies in the zombie crowd were at level 3, and some were at level 2, there were no level 1 zombies at all. But this zombie crowd should not have almost wiped out the rescue teams of the major bases. Then there was only one explanation. There were higher-level zombies hiding in the zombie crowd. Xiaoqing observed carefully, and soon saw a little girl standing in the zombie crowd not far away. The little girl looked to be about 8 or 9 years old. She had a head of long black hair that was draped over her shoulders. She was wearing a pink princess dress that was a little dirty. She was also holding a teddy bear in her arms. The bear should have been brown, but because it was stained with too much dust and blood, it had turned dark black. At a glance, it looked more like an ordinary little girl who had been separated from her family. However, when the little girl raised her face, Xiaoqing realized that her face was very delicate and pretty. It was round and chubby with a tinge of pink. However, there were only holes left in her eyes. In the black holes, 2 glass-like eyes were burning with a layer of flames. Only this could let others know that she was not a living person. The little girl seemed to have felt Xiaoqing's gaze. She grinned and showed her jagged teeth. She was very fierce, and her strength was very high. Xiaoqing could not help but take a deep breath. Was this the mastermind of this zombie crowd? If so, this zombie crowd would be very dangerous. Zombies at this level should have high intelligence, and they let so many zombies. It was definitely not easy to deal with them. Just when Xiaoqing was deep in thought, the zombie had disappeared. She frowned and continued to move forward. Soon, she saw a second zombie that was different from the others. That zombie was an adult man. He was dressed like a white-collar worker and wore a pair of glasses. He looked more like a living person than the little girl zombie. Chapter 278. However, its collar was open, and there should have been a heart in its chest. Now there was only a rotten black hole. Through the black hole, one could see its empty body. There was not a single piece of internal organs inside, but there was an infant zombie, looking outside with its head. The baby zombie was wrinkled and looked like it had just been born, but the surface of its body was bluish-black. It was also smiling at Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing felt cold all over. These 2 zombies, their strength was not lower than the little girl zombie. If she fought the little girl zombie alone, she could still win, but with these 2 zombies, she was afraid that she would be the one to die. Xiaoqing could only bite the bullet and walk in. Fortunately, until she approached the reservoir, she did not see any other high-level mutant zombies. When she arrived at the reservoir, Xiaoqing was worried. How should she get in? The outermost layer of barbed wire was covered with vines, and there were small flowers on the vines, which looked very green and beautiful. With Xiaoqing's eyes, she could see that the vines were not only poisonous, but also highly poisonous. And if she rashly climbed over the wall, she would be regarded as an invading zombie, right? Xiaoqing thought about it and decided to climb over the wall. But the way she climbed over the wall was special. The vines grew from the ground and formed an upward vine pillar, sending Xiaoqing and the other 2 into the air, and then she jumped in. In the next second, the patrolman shouted, "Enemy attack! There are zombies climbing over the wall." Then a group of people came out of the second layer of the wall. All of them were highly alert and ready to use their powers. Xiaoqing. She slowly raised her hand and said, "I'm just here to deliver supplies." In fact, the people inside had already run out of food. In the morning, they had eaten their last meal, and were already prepared to starve. Then they starved for less than an entire afternoon. Before the sun had even set, the supplies had already arrived. It was really fast. Xiaoqing calmly asked Alan to take out the food and water, and then comforted them. Several major survival bases have been discussing countermeasures. Before I came, I had already heard that they were gathering people to try to carry out a second rescue. Don't worry too much. A group of people in white coats who looked very embarrassed came out, and he quickly said, "Thank you very much for taking the risk to deliver the food. Let's sit inside first." Xiaoqing nodded. She took Dummy and Alan to follow these people in. She was sensitive to the fact that these people were like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Everyone's faces were filled with deep exhaustion and fear. However, Xiaoqing just thought that they had been besieged for a long time and were physically and mentally exhausted, and did not think in other directions. Until she sat down, Xiaoqing found that there was something wrong with the number of people. The news from the base was that there were a total of 30 researchers, and they had been carefully protected. Even if several of them died because of the zombie tide, There were still about 25 people left. However, Xiaoqing counted again and again, and there were only 25 people in this group. She couldn't say that all the members of the guard group were dead, right? Only the researchers were left. However, the leader of the researchers did not mean to talk more. He just asked Xiaoqing, "Miss, how did you get in here?" There were zombies outside, but Xiaoqing and the others could still enter the reservoir unscathed. They couldn't help but wonder. Xiaoqing smiled and said vaguely, "I have a special ability that can temporarily not be detected by zombies, but this ability can't protect too many people." Chapter 279. It was not that Xiaoqing was too vigilant, but it was the end of the world. Even in peacetime, there was a saying that one should not reveal their wealth, not to mention the end of the world. There were so many people sitting here, and no one knew what they were thinking. Moreover, her and Erdai's identities must not be exposed. After Xiaoqing finished speaking, a few people's eyes revealed a strange light. They looked at Xiaoqing with a strange, eager, and indescribable feeling. Xiaoqing felt uncomfortable being stared at. The researcher who spoke first quickly glared at those people and said, "It's almost dark now. You must be tired from delivering the supplies. Why don't you take a rest first? Someone will keep watch at night, so you don't need to worry. You should rest well." Xiaoqing felt a little strange, but she didn't say much. She took Lan and Erdai to rest. She saw clearly that the person with the highest status in this group should be the one sitting in the center. He was older, with wrinkles on his face, and looked a little old-fashioned. The one who kept talking should be his assistant. However, Xiaoqing was too lazy to ask too much. She took Erdai and Lan to rest. A paranormal took them to a room and said coldly, "Don't come out at night if there's nothing wrong. It's dangerous outside." Then he left. There was a feeling of something wrong everywhere. Xiaoqing didn't want to think more, but she couldn't help thinking more than usual. After the three of them stayed in the room for a while, someone brought in some hot dry food. They had been trapped for a long time, and someone brought them food. They should be more energetic. However, whether it was the person who led them here or the person who brought them food, they all looked tired, cold, and desperate. After a simple meal, Xiaoqing told the two people, "I feel something is wrong. We should be careful at night. After all, the situation is special now. We don't know what will happen at night. Lan, you go to sleep. Erdai and I will keep watch at night." Lan nodded obediently and quickly got into the quilt. But after a while, she sat up with the quilt and said with a bitter face, "I can't sleep. When I close my eyes now, I see the zombie crowd outside." Xiaoqing smiled and put a stool at the door. "I'll keep watch here. If there's anything, I'll inform you. Go to sleep." Lan turned over and over. After a while, she covered her head with the quilt and curled up. Xiaoqing leaned against the back of the chair. As soon as she sat down, Erdai rushed over and hugged Xiaoqing's waist intimately. He hadn't been alone with Xiaoqing for a long time. Since the last time he came back, there was an annoying Yin Qiyu beside Xiaoqing. He had been fighting with him for Xiaoqing. Humph. I hate Yin Qiyu the most. He wants to snatch everything. Even half of Xiaoqing's bed was occupied by him. Therefore, Erdai was very happy that he could be alone with Xiaoqing this time. Finally, they could spend some time together. As for Lan, he had completely ignored her. Xiaoqing sighed helplessly and caught Erdai, who rushed over. The space in the chair couldn't accommodate two people, so Erdai curled himself up in Xiaoqing's arms. This posture was too uncomfortable. Xiaoqing pouted her lips. "There's another seat over there. Sit by yourself. Why are you sitting on my lap?" Erdai pretended that he didn't hear her, and curled up obediently. Fortunately, his body was soft. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to do it. After all, he was a man with a relatively broad frame. Even if he looked a little younger, his frame wasn't small. Xiaoqing didn't want to scold Erdai, so she had to indulge him. They kept this posture until late at night. Xiaoqing, who was a little sleepy because Erdai was in her arms, suddenly heard a shrill scream. Chapter 280. This voice was clearly from a woman, and it was filled with despair and fear. Xiaoqing remembered that she had seen two women during the day. One was ordinary and hard to remember, while the other was wearing a white coat and following beside the old man. She looked quite delicate and pretty. As soon as the voice rang out, Alan, who was not sleeping deeply, immediately woke up. She looked at Xiaoqing with a panicked expression. When she saw Xiaoqing's calmness, she miraculously calmed down a little. The three of them hurriedly went out the door and followed the direction of the voice. They lived a little further away from the scene of the incident. When they arrived, there were already many people there. Everyone's face was filled with deep despair. Xiaoqing walked to the front of the crowd. Then she saw a woman in a white coat with a delicate face sitting on the ground with a pale face. Her face was covered in cold sweat, and even her facial features were twisted into a ferocious look because of deep fear. Not far in front of her was a corpse. It should have been a corpse that had died not long ago, because the corpse was still steaming. The reason why the corpse was steaming was because the skin below the neck had been peeled off, revealing a blurry layer of flesh and the texture of the muscles. The corpse's limbs were all twisted beyond recognition. His stomach was also cut open. His intestines were pulled out very long and wrapped around his neck several times. It looked like he had strangled himself with his intestines. The only thing that was intact was his head. His face was filled with horror and deep despair. His tongue was pulled out very long, broken, and stuffed back in. The old man squeezed through the crowd and walked in. Beside him was the middle-aged man who had spoken during the day. He glanced at the tragic corpse on the ground with a serious expression. After a while he said, "Take it down and bury it. Everyone go back to sleep." Xiaoqing was slightly puzzled by his calm reaction. At this time, shouldn't they investigate? At the very least, they should investigate the cause of his death, and then raise their vigilance? And this old man seemed to be used to this kind of scene, unless, in these days of being surrounded, similar things had happened so many times that they even knew who was the one who did it. However, if it was the zombies outside who had the ability to come in, why didn't they rush in and kill all of them instead of killing them one by one? This was not in line with the habits of zombies. If it was a human, it would be even more unreasonable. If they knew who the murderer was, they could just catch him. If they didn't know, they could at least investigate. In short, this kind of situation was too wrong. Before Xiaoqing could figure it out, the woman sitting on the ground suddenly attacked. She pulled at her hair as if she had gone crazy. Her eyes, which were dilated because of fear, were particularly empty. With resentment, she stared at Xiaoqing and screamed, "It's them! They must have brought the demon in. Otherwise, why would those monsters come in?" As she spoke, she covered her face. Only her eyes were exposed from the gaps between her fingers. She looked at Xiaoqing and others with resentment. The crowd immediately began to whisper. They seemed to have forgotten that it was Xiaoqing who brought the food. Everyone looked at Xiaoqing with strange eyes. After being besieged for so long, the pressure, despair, and the approach of death had almost driven them crazy. The old man frowned and whispered, "Enough! Don't talk nonsense. Qing Mei, you take and ran back. She is frightened. You have to appease her." The ordinary-looking woman responded and stepped forward to help the woman named Anran. Anran had probably collapsed. She covered her face all the way. She just looked outside through the gaps between her fingers. Her mouth was still muttering something. Chapter 281. When she passed by, Xiaoqing could hear what she was saying. Anran was muttering, "They came to collect the debt. None of them can escape. None of them can escape." Xiaoqing couldn't help but feel goosebumps all over her body. She only felt that everything here was strange. These people seemed to know the truth, but it also seemed that no one knew. They were already in despair, already crazy, already on the verge of collapse. The old man walked over. He seemed to want to smile, but because he had always maintained a cold expression, it made his smile look especially awkward. It was like a fake smile. "I'm sorry. You guys should go back and rest. It's almost dawn." Alan seemed to want to ask something, but Xiaoqing grabbed her hand and said, "Old mister, you two will go back first." He looked at Dai and then left with the middle-aged man. Xiaoqing also went back with Dai and Alan. At this moment, it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. It was the most sleepy time of the day, But the three people were not sleepy at all. As soon as they returned to the room, Alon couldn't help but ask Xiaoqing. Why didn't anyone check it? Why do they all seem to be used to it? Why is the whole thing so weird? Xiaoqing patted Alon on the shoulder. There were a lot of guesses that she couldn't tell her, so she just said, the situation is special now. What we have to do is to wait quietly and wait for rescue. There are some things that the more you don't know, the safer it is. You go back to sleep, it's almost dawn. Alan's shoulders softened, and she sat on the bed, but she didn't sleep. She just curled herself into a ball. Xiaoqing sighed. She had a terrible headache. She let air die and stood in front of the window, her mind in a mess. Since she couldn't fall asleep now, Xiaoqing thought about the whole thing from beginning to end. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. In the end, she was too lazy to think about it. She leaned her head on Air Dai's shoulder and began to think about leaving. The rescue team should arrive in a few days. After completing this task, she wanted to bring Air Dai and the others to the south. The climate in the south was mild and suitable for the growth of plants. She wanted to travel there and look for high-level mutated plants to fill the gap in her hands. The next day, those people returned to normal. Although they still looked very dispirited and hopeless, they were much better than last night. When Xiaoqing was eating, she also looked around, but she didn't see Ran, nor did she see Qing Mei. Presumably, she hadn't recovered yet, so it was inconvenient for her to come out and eat. The whole day passed in a daze. At night, as Xiaoqing expected, another person died. This time, the one who died was a little older. His death was particularly tragic. His body was hung on a tree, and his internal organs and other things were hanging outside. What was even worse was that his two eyes were dug out and stuck on a branch next to him. The atmosphere of despair surrounding the people became more intense. Everyone seemed to be lingering with death. Xiaoqing couldn't help but frown every time she saw it. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoqing lived here for 3 days and witnessed 3 tragedies. After these 3 tragedies were summarized by Xiaoqing, she found the following similarities. First, the deceased were all researchers. Everyone was wearing a white coat. Second, they all died very miserably. They were all tortured to death. Although there were many doubts, Xiaoqing couldn't figure out who the homicidal maniac was. It wasn't until the 4th day that the news came in that the rescue team had assembled and was about to come. Even if such good news came, these survivors were not very excited because of it. However, the zombies seemed to know that the rescue team would arrive soon and finally launched a general attack. Chapter 282. The zombies were going to attack the reservoir. As soon as the news came back from the patrol team, everyone entered a state of readiness. Don't look at the number of people left here. There were not many, but many of them were researchers without the strength to truss a chicken. Many of them had no abilities. Even if they had abilities, most of them were brain mutations. For example, making their memory better. They had no fighting power at all. Therefore, the heavy responsibility was shouldered by the remaining guards. Everywhere was filled with the gloomy atmosphere of a coming storm. Xiaoqing walked around in a circle. Everyone was preparing for war. Only, Ran was not. She was crazy. Every day, she would sit by the window, holding a small flower, staring blankly at the sky. Sometimes she would look at the earth wall and murmur a sentence or two. Qing Mei was also a person with abilities. In order to prepare for war, she was not by Ran's side. Xiaoqing stopped by the window and could not help but look at Ran. Ran looked at Xiaoqing with a pair of dark eyes. After a long while he said, "It's all retribution." Xiaoqing frowned slightly. She always felt that Ran also knew a lot. She lowered her voice and asked, "The murderer? Who is it?" It's the devil." Ran found it difficult to suppress the fear in her eyes. She grabbed Xiaoqing's arm in a panic and said, "Go run, the devil is coming." Then she began to walk around the room shouting the words, "The devil is coming." Xiaoqing crushed the small flower in her hand. Her thoughts were very complicated. During the day, the zombies would not attack. They were also gathering and accumulating strength. When the sun went down, it was estimated that it would be time for them to really attack. When Xiaoqing came out, She promised to take Elan back. So she told Elan many times that she must not leave her side. Erdai was very obedient. Knowing that her mind was in a mess, he massaged her temples and shoulders. When Xiaoqing was about to fall asleep with her eyes closed, he secretly kissed Xiaoqing's forehead. Finally, at night, the attack of the zombies was about to begin. These people, compared to the zombies outside, were simply pitiful. They had already sent out a distress signal. As long as they could hold on until the reinforcements arrived, there would still be a chance. Xiaoqing was now worried that Yan Hanqing and the others would barge in. After all, she was still inside. If they were impulsive and really rushed in, it would be bad. At that time, no matter what kind of damage there would be, it was not something Xiaoqing wanted to see. Now, she could only pray that Yan Hanqing and the others would listen to her and obediently join the reinforcements. As soon as the sun went down, the zombies began to attack. They destroyed the first defense. Xiaoqing took Erdai and Elan to join the rest of the people. They saw with their own eyes how the zombies destroyed the first defense wall. It was completely pushed down by violence. But there was a problem. They obviously had the ability to push down the defense wall. Why did they just surround and not attack? However, at this point, no matter how many doubts there were, they could only put aside for the time being. The old man organized the rest of the researchers and began to retreat in an orderly manner. The second defense wall could not last long. They had to retreat into the house and rely on the building to fight with the zombies. They retreated into a large warehouse. They did not know what it used to be used to store things. Anyway, it was very empty now, and the ground was covered with dust. As soon as they came in, they sealed the door first, hoping to hold on for a while. Soon the zombies broke the second defense wall. They could even hear the zombies' claws constantly scratching the wall. Chapter 283. The rustling sound made people feel very uncomfortable. The group of people in the warehouse were frightened. Soon the window suddenly broke, and a black shadow came in. Immediately, countless superpowers were aimed at it, as if they wanted to tear it apart. However, it was very fast. It directly went into the crowd, grabbed the neck of a man in a white coat, and began to bite. Xiaoqing saw it clearly. It was a young male zombie. It had shark-like teeth, but its appearance was infinitely similar to that of a human, except that it was blind in one eye. The man in the white coat didn't have any superpower at all, so he was bitten to death in an instant. It jumped up and targeted the old man. When it jumped up, it screamed shrilly, and its voice was full of resentment. Then it ignored the others and directly rushed to the old man. The old man was very calm. He counted and then said, 04796, Fire Superpower Possessors go. A Fire Superpower Possessor walked out. As soon as the fireball in his hand fell on the zombie, it screamed and its skin seemed to be on fire. A high-level zombie like it shouldn't be so afraid of fire, but it was as if it was on fire. It happened so fast that many people didn't have time to react. By the time they reacted, the zombie had already escaped through the window. At this moment, Xiaoqing's face was expressionless as she looked at the window. She suddenly connected everything together, and the answer she received shocked her. However, she was just guessing. There were some things that she couldn't confirm. Hiding in the warehouse, there were fewer places where they had to face zombies, so they were much safer. However, it was also very difficult to defend. Once they were broken through, they would die. There was nowhere to run. After driving away the zombie, the whole warehouse fell into silence. After a long time, a voice was heard. That's 04796. The old man suddenly raised his head and looked at the speaker. Then his face changed. Yinyi, now is not the time for you to talk nonsense. The man named Yinyi was a very thin young man wearing glasses. He looked weak, and his face was very pale. However, his words were very cold. I tried to persuade you many times, but you didn't listen. Now it's all karma. Lu Dong, believe it or not, if the warehouse is broken, you will be the last one to die, because they don't want you to die. The old man, who was Lu Dong, suddenly became very angry. He said coldly, Yinyi, do you think you are a good person? I'm not a good person, but anyway, I didn't experiment on living people. Yinyi smiled and then said, Now they are back for revenge. Lu Dong, I'm watching. Shut him up. Lu Dong suddenly turned his head and looked at Xiaoqing coldly. Immediately, someone covered Inye's mouth and dragged him to a corner to calm him down. Xiaoqing suddenly understood. She was wondering why there were suddenly so many high-level zombies with different appearances. Why those zombies would surround them and kill them every day, but they didn't break through in one go. He also understood why those people had died so miserably. One sentence explained everything. Using living people for experiments. Japan used to like to do human experiments. However, before the apocalypse, when it was still peaceful, such experiments were forbidden. Once discovered, they would be attacked by other countries. But after the apocalypse, when there was no one to restrain those people, they actually did human experiments without any scruples. Listen to the number, 04796. That meant that before it, there were at least 4,795 experimental subjects. Where did so many experimental subjects come from? All of them were living people. These people are insane. Xiaoqing's eyes were cold. When she looked at those people again, it was as if she was looking at dead people. It was too disgusting. How could they do such a crazy thing? Thinking of those strange zombies that they met on the way here, there was a little girl among them. This could no longer be described as crazy. They were simply a group of beasts. No, they were worse than beasts. Miss Xiaoqing, please go over there. Two people came over and said please, but their eyes were threatening. Xiaoqing didn't resist. She had to make things clear first. Dumbo, Xiaoqing and Lan were invited to Inye's side and watched over as if they were under house arrest. Inye hugged his legs and calmly looked out the window at the zombies baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. Because the glass was broken, they had to attack to fill the gap, so that the zombies couldn't come in through the window. So they held on for a few more hours. Inye sneered and closed his eyes. He was too lazy to look at them. Xiaoqing saw that those people didn't have time to care about them, so she asked in a low voice, "Can you tell me those things?" Inye looked at her expressionlessly. "Are you curious?" Xiaoqing didn't say anything. She just looked at Inye. Inye bit his nails and said after a while, "I'm a researcher. I used to be the deputy director of the institute. Later, because I strongly oppose human experiments, I'm nothing now. But I couldn't stop them from carrying out such a crazy experiment. In the third week after the apocalypse, they carried out their first experiment. All the people used for the experiment were survivors. They caught zombies and bit the survivors, then observed the process of them turning into zombies and recorded it down. That was the beginning. Later on, they became crazier and crazier, and they became more and more unrestrained. Not only ordinary people, but also some paranormals who had just awakened. Some paranormals who weren't very strong, or some paranormals who had special abilities and weren't very valuable, became their experimental subjects. Chapter 284. In the first batch of ordinary people who were captured, the oldest was 70 years old, and the youngest was only 1 year and 3 months old. There were 2 pregnant women in the middle. At that time, I strongly opposed this experiment, so I was locked up. They wanted me to reflect. Inye sneered and said, "When I finished my reflection, the first experiment was already done." At that time, they were calculating the results of the experiment, and those who had turned into zombies were still lying on the experiment table in pieces. Even the pregnant women and children were the same. The pregnant women and children were taken out to do the experiment alone. At that time, they recorded that the younger the child, after being infected, the more likely it was that the mutated zombie would have special abilities. After the pregnant women were infected, their bodies would quickly die, and the energy would be supplied to the child in their bodies, causing the child to undergo a second mutation. Speaking of this, his eyes were already red. I remember many years ago, when I was still a student. At that time, I thought that all the knowledge I had learned could be used to serve the country. But later, I found that I had become an accomplice. I could do nothing but watch those people. What happened later? Xiaoqing was very calm, but her body was full of murderous intent. The reason why she didn't explode yet was that she wanted to know all the facts to decide what to do next. After a long time, They began to be dissatisfied and began to use paranormals for experiments. These paranormals were against the base chief at that time, and some of them were useless because of their special abilities, so they were all sent here. As we all know, paranormals can't be infected, but they use some unknown means to transform and infect paranormals. After the experiment, some paranormals retained the vitality of humans, and some of them were poisoned by zombies. What's more, they not only retained the ability of zombies, but also retained their abilities. One of the paranormals was pregnant, and after the experiment, they cut open her belly and got a half-zombie baby. This baby actually had the ability to control other zombies. They were ecstatic and wanted to create a zombie king to control all the zombies in the world, but retribution was not good. Those transformed paranormals all retained a certain degree of consciousness, and when they found the opportunity, they escaped, and then launched their revenge. The entire base was destroyed. Lu Dong saw that the situation was not good, so he secretly escaped with his people and contacted the research institute in the capital, but he didn't expect that those experimental subjects would follow us. You all know what happened next. Inyi was a little dispirited. He should be suffering from the pain of being able to see but not being able to save them. After a long time of torment, he was so thin that only his bones were left. Xiaoqing patted him on the shoulder and was stunned. She glanced at Inyi again but didn't say anything. Inyi was hiding something, and Xiaoqing knew that. But everyone had their own secrets, so she didn't want to ask. The biggest problem now was that she didn't want this group of beasts with human faces to reach the capital alive. It was better for such disgusting things to be burned to ashes and buried in the ground. That would be more suitable for them to return to their homeland. Inyi continued. The group of zombies outside was led by the experimental subjects at that time. They surrounded them but didn't kill them. In fact, they wanted to torture this group of people until they collapsed bit by bit. They wanted to make them suffer a fate worse than death, and then kill them. But they didn't expect that the reinforcements would come so quickly. Chapter 285. Xiaoqing nodded. She didn't say what she was going to do. She just sat in the corner. When she closed her eyes, the daughter seeds had been quietly spread out. Any paranormals who hadn't reached level 4, or those with special abilities, would be quietly infiltrated by her daughter seeds. In other words, the life and death of this group of people were in her hands. However, Xiaoqing understood that these people could die, but they had to have nothing to do with her. Otherwise, it would be very troublesome. By the time night had completely fallen, everyone was exhausted. Wave after wave of attacks had exhausted their physical strength. If this continued, their defenses would be breached very soon. Before the new wave of attacks came, what they needed to do was to change the defense. Those who were resting would take the place of this group of people. One of them suddenly said, "Why do I feel so cold? The weather is changing more and more." Xiaoqing looked out of the window. Countless zombies were wandering. At this time, a sharp howl sounded. Another wave of attacks began. At night, there was no light. The whole warehouse was dark. Xiaoqing could clearly see cracks on the door and windows. There was a very simple principle called thermal expansion and contraction. Xiaoqing had to admit that those experimental subjects were very smart. They used ice and fire powers to break the last barrier under the cover of the night. If she didn't know those things, Xiaoqing would definitely remind them. However, after knowing everything, Xiaoqing didn't want to remind these beasts. No, calling them beasts was simply an insult to beasts. Lambs would kneel for milk, crows would feed back, and these beasts were completely heartless. Soon, the doors and windows were completely broken. Those who had just changed the defense didn't have time to react. Zombies poured in. There were several different zombies in the zombie crowd. In addition to the little girl, the blind boy, and the young man with the baby zombie in his chest, there were several other zombies with different appearances. One of them was a woman. Her appearance was very gentle, especially her pair of gentle eyes. Other than the scara of her eyes being a little smaller, she looked very normal. However, the skin and flesh on her hands were almost completely rotten. Moreover, they seemed to be much thicker than a normal person's arms. The other was a young man. His face was pale, but there was a bulge on his back, which made him look like a born turtle. He was bare-chested. When he turned around, people could see that there was a woman's face on his back. It was a woman's face that looked exactly like him. The woman could even talk. She had been crying softly. "Brother, brother, I'm in pain." It was said that those who were older either died on the operating table or were destroyed after the experiment because they were worthless. There were only a few experimental subjects left. The one who controlled the zombie crowd was the baby zombie living in the young man's chest. Its body was weak, so it had to rely on the young man to move. The group of researchers almost went crazy. What could be more terrifying than their experimental subjects coming back for revenge? Xiaoqing looked at the group of experimental subjects indifferently. She didn't want to do anything. It seemed that she didn't need to do anything. The only thing she had to think about now was how to take Lan and Yinyi away. She and Erdai would definitely be fine, but Lan and Yinyi would attract the attention of the zombies. Those people had now collapsed. They almost gave up resisting, but at this time, there was a light not far away, and there was a lot of noise. Chapter 286. Lu Dong's old voice was heard. "Look, the rescuers are here. Hold on a little longer. Just a little longer and we'll be rescued." Only then did those people pull themselves together and carry out the last resistance, fighting and retreating, waiting for rescue. Those zombies also became anxious, seeing that the rescue team was about to arrive. If they did not quickly end the battle, they would be surrounded. Maybe some of them can survive this time. Even God doesn't help them. Yinye's disappointed voice sounded in Xiaoqing's ears. He said in a low voice, "When it's over, you have to be careful. They won't let you who know their secret live." "You." Before Xiaoqing could finish speaking, she saw Yinyi stand up and slowly walk toward Lu Dong. Lu Dong was very vigilant. As soon as he heard the footsteps, he turned his head. "Yinyi, what are you doing?" Yinyi didn't say anything, but the white coat on his body fluttered as if it was blown by the wind. When he was about to approach Lu Dong, his clothes were instantly torn apart, and several black tentacles shot out in an instant. The two people standing in front of Lu Dong had their bodies pierced by the tentacles in an instant. Then, Yinyi quickly took a step forward, and the other tentacles wriggling around him aimed at Lu Dong. Lu Dong took 2 steps back in panic. Soon he calmed down. Yinye's tentacles seemed to be stuck on an invisible barrier and couldn't move forward. "You actually..." Lu Dong was so frightened that he lost his voice. Yinyi glanced at him, and seemed to know that he wouldn't be able to kill Lu Dong today. He turned his head to the others, and the other experimentals quickly gathered with Yinyi. Only then did Xiaoqing understand why she kept feeling that something was amiss when Yinyi was telling the story. How could those controlled experimental subjects escape so easily? They were obviously set free by Yinyi. He watched Lu Dong and the others do such a thing, but he couldn't do anything to stop them. Under the torment of conscience and guilt, Yinyi did something crazy. He injected himself with the zombie virus, and then experimented on himself. Obviously, Yinyi had successfully modified himself. Then he carried out the second step of destroying Lu Dong and the others. He secretly released the experimental subjects, and then led this group of experimental subjects to take revenge. There was one thing that Yinyi didn't tell her, but Xiaoqing knew that Lu Dong's experiment wasn't as simple as Yinyi said. They seemed to have transplanted parts of zombies or mutant animals into superpowered people's bodies. For example, the eyes on the little girl's face, which clearly didn't belong to her, the arms of the young man, and finally the tentacles on Yinye's body. They were destined not to be able to kill Lu Dong today, because they didn't know how long Lu Dong's spiritual barrier could last. Therefore, what they needed to do was to kill as many researchers as possible. When there were very few people left, the rescue team finally arrived. Yinyi waved his hand and said, "Retreat." When they passed by Xiaoqing, Xiaoqing said softly to Yinyi, "Don't worry, he won't live long." "Thank you very much." Yinyi lowered his voice and said. The zombies retreated like a tide. The rescue team was dumbfounded. They were ready to fight hard and lose a lot of people, but those zombies ran away by themselves? But it was a good thing after all. The leaders of several bases hurried into the warehouse. As soon as they entered, they saw corpses everywhere. Only Lu Dong and the other 3 people in white coats were still alive. Of course, Xiaoqing and the others were more conspicuous. One of the leaders of the bases hurriedly said, "Sorry we came late. It took us some time to gather people, but we didn't expect." Chapter 287. Lu Dong hadn't recovered from his panic. He didn't expect that Yin Yi would dare to experiment on him. He didn't react until Xiaoqing patted her butt and took Dai and the others out. He pointed at Xiaoqing and said, "Get her. Everyone catch her. She's in cahoots with zombies." No matter what, they couldn't let Xiaoqing live. Otherwise, all their secrets would be exposed. Those people were stunned for a moment, then they looked at Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing didn't get angry. She just calmly raised her eyebrows and said, "If you want to speak, you need evidence. Is this old Mr. scared out of his wits? I just came here to deliver supplies. What does it have to do with zombies? Secondly, before I came here, I was on a mission with someone else. When I returned to the base, you were already surrounded. Many people can testify to that. How could you have time to collude with zombies? You must have been scared out of your mind." Lu Dong said with conviction. "Yin Yi is a zombie who lurked here. You were so close to him and talked so much. There must be something wrong. Besides, the man behind you is not a human. If you want to prove that you have nothing to do with zombies, sure. Zombies can't talk. Let him say something." Xiaoqing's eyes were filled with frost. She looked at Lu Dong as if she was looking at a dead man. She sneered and said, "He had a disease when he was young. He was burned until he became stupid. He's not a mute, but he's more like a mute. You want him to talk to prove that he's not a zombie? You're really trying to frame him." Qin Zishi and the others were also in the crowd. They said, "Open your eyes and listen with your ears. Don't be scared out of your wits. Everyone looks like a zombie's accomplice." At this moment, Lu Dong was no longer the same person who would comb his hair neatly even when he was on the run. Even a fly would break its leg if it stood on his hair. Now he was even older, and his gaze was filled with despair and madness. "Say something. Say something." Xiaoqing looked at Lu Dong coldly. She was holding a vine in her hand. She was ready to kill Lu Dong directly. However, Dai suddenly approached her and hugged her. He said in a hoarse voice, "Qing." Xiaoqing was stunned. She seemed to have heard Dai call her. Was it a hallucination? Dai rubbed Xiaoqing's neck with his face. He said with difficulty, "Qing." His voice was as if he hadn't spoken for many years. But Xiaoqing was overjoyed. She turned around and held Dai's chin, her eyes sparkling. "What did you call me?" Dai looked very serious. He said with difficulty, "Qing." Xiaoqing kissed Dai happily. Yan Qiyue, who was in the crowd, was jealous. He was jealous, but he couldn't vent his anger on his own people. So he pointed his gun at Lu Dong and said, "Are you scared out of your mind? If you're crazy, you should be taken away. Take your medicine and lock him up. Don't let him out to bite people." Some people who were looking at Xiaoqing and the others with vigilant eyes also breathed a sigh of relief. It was better to be safe than sorry. After Dumbo E proved his identity, Lu Dong became dispirited. He had originally made a guess. Since he was at the end of the road, he had no choice but to try to bite Xiaoqing. Unexpectedly, he had guessed wrong. As long as Xiaoqing revealed what he had done, not only would his reputation be ruined, but he would also be put under house arrest. Lu Dong had enjoyed a lifetime of glory, a lifetime of being high and mighty. How could he allow Xiaoqing to ruin everything? However, Xiaoqing didn't seem to want to say it out. She took Lan's hand and went to Qin Zishi. She handed Lan to Qin Zishi and said, "I brought her back safely, but she was scared out of her wits. You have to give her a raise." Qin Zishi smiled, and 2 small dimples appeared. "Don't worry." A group of people came and went back in a mighty manner. It was as if they didn't have anything to do. They didn't leave directly, but stayed in the reservoir. After all, the dead bodies had to be dealt with. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if they turned into zombies. What's more, it's nighttime. What if they get attacked by zombies? So they had to stay here and wait for dawn to return to the base. Xiaoqing calmly gathered her friends and called Qin Zishi. After all, Lan was there. Qin Zishi would definitely know the inside story. It was better for her to have the final say. After everyone was gathered, Xiaoqing checked to see if anyone was eavesdropping. Then she told her friends everything that had happened in the past 2 days, including her guess. Gu Panpan was the most bad-tempered one. She jumped up and was ready to kill Lu Dong and his friends. What the hell? How can such scum deserve to live? I'll send them to hell. Don't be impulsive. Didn't you see that he has already pointed the finger at me today? He's just worried that I'll expose everything he's done. I originally wanted to expose all these things, then ruin his reputation and let him die painfully. But I thought of another point. According to Yin Yi, the General Research Institute of the capital city is quite clear about their affairs. In other words, they don't mind Lu Dong's human experiments. If this matter is exposed, will they protect Lu Dong? I don't want to bet on whether they have a conscience or not, so I'm going to suppress this matter for the time being and do it myself. Xiaoqing said lightly. She couldn't trust the senior management of the capital city anymore. Instead of hoping that they would deal with Lu Dong, she would do it herself. Chapter 288. Qin Zishi was calmer than Xiaoqing imagined. He bit his nails and said after a while, I think it's feasible. Xiaoqing nodded. It was not that her idea was too dark, but the world was like this. All the crows in the world were equally dark. Instead of hoping that the capital would do something to Lu Dong, she would rather do it herself. What was the saying again? Do it yourself to get enough food and clothing. As something seemed wrong. In short, Xiaoqing was ready to kill. She would not let Lu Dong reach the capital. After a peaceful night, Lu Dong requested to set off early the next morning. He would not be at ease until he reached the capital. It was not his fault that he was timid. It was just that he had been on tenterhooks all this time. He had reached the bottom line. If it went on like this, he would collapse before anyone could kill him. Only when he reached the capital, contacted the research institute, and got his personal protection, could he be at ease. Xiaoqing was too lazy to pay attention to him. She was teaching Dai how to speak sentence by sentence. Yesterday's sentence was like a flash in the pan. No matter how Xiaoqing guided Dai could not say a word. Looking at his aggrieved appearance, Xiaoqing sighed helplessly. She had a long way to go. Since the morning, Lu Dong had been emphasizing that Xiaoqing wanted to harm him and wanted others to separate them. The person in charge of the survival base in S-City patted Xiaoqing's shoulder and said, I heard that the researcher beside him is a zombie who has been hiding for a long time. He is probably scared. Now everyone looks like a zombie to him. We can only temporarily separate you and him. Sorry for the inconvenience. Xiaoqing waved her hand and said, I understand. Anyway, he will be sent back to the capital soon. Out of sight, out of mind. The more isolated they were, the easier it would be to do it. No one would suspect her. After all, no one would think that she would do something to Lu Dong when Lu Dong had been targeting her. The darkness under the light was like that. The more Lu Dong targeted her, the less suspicious she would be when something happened. Xiaoqing was very leisurely. She even had time to cut fruits and share them with her friends. She was now waiting for nightfall. Once nightfall arrived, it would be her home ground. They did not directly send Lu Dong and the others to the capital. Instead, they first returned to the nearest base to rest and reorganize. Then, they mobilized a portion of their men to act as escorts to send Lu Dong back to the capital. The first night after leaving the reservoir was not spent in the base. They set up camp on the spot. In order to protect Lu Dong's tent was set up in the center. The others' tents surrounded his tent several times. He had also set up 4 night watch squads to take turns with each other. If anything were to happen, they would be able to react quickly and protect Lu Dong. In the evening, they ate pork bone soup stewed with vegetables. The soup was freshly cooked and the vegetables were fresh. The taste was very delicious. After eating, Xiaoqing and the others went into the tent to conserve energy. Night came quickly. In the wee hours of the morning, Xiaoqing woke up from her sleep. She plucked a petal of the autumn lotus and tore through space. After the evolution of her special ability, Xiaoqing's control over the power of space had become much smoother. Although she could cross space through cracks before, the landing point and distance were all within a general range. Now she could control it very carefully. For example, when she appeared in Lu Dong's tent from her tent, Lu Dong and the others were sleeping very soundly. Especially after the fragrance of the autumn lotus slowly filled the air. They slept even more soundly. Xiaoqing picked one out of the 4 who had escaped the net. Of course, this person was not Lu Dong. She would let Lu Dong die in the end, dying in endless fear and despair. Chapter 289. After selecting the target, Xiaoqing calmly took out tape and sealed his mouth. Then the daughter in his body woke up. No matter how deep asleep a person was, they would be awakened by the pain. When the person woke up, he found that his mouth was sealed and his body was tied up. He couldn't even moan. Lu Dong and the others were sleeping beside him, but he couldn't ask for help. He could only feel something raging in his body, taking away his life bit by bit. He was like a fish on a chopping board. He couldn't resist at all. He didn't know why, but he remembered that when he was doing experiments in the past, those people on the experiment table were also in despair at that time. They couldn't resist, they couldn't even struggle. They could only watch as the scalpel cut open their skin, and even their stomachs. They looked at their own bodies, like pigs being slaughtered, spread out on the operating table. Their fresh organs were still beating. The next morning, Lu Dong woke up late. This was the best sleep he had in a while. There were no roars of zombies, no rotting smell, no despair and no fear. Then he opened his eyes and saw the corpse hanging in the tent. The naked corpse was hung in the posture of a victim in Western mythology. The body was full of scars, and there wasn't even a piece of intact skin. The most frightening thing was that his eyelids had been cut off, revealing his protruding eyeballs. The corners of his mouth had also been cut open into a smile. Blood was like lipstick, smeared all over his cracked mouth. It was bright red, making him look like a clown who was juggling. Bloody horror, and indescribable panic. How did he die? Lu Dong didn't know at all. He even slept soundly and had a beautiful dream. In the dream, he returned to the capital, entered the research institute, and used his power to capture Xiaoqing. Xiaoqing was lying on the operating table for the experiment, and he could do whatever he wanted to her. However, when he woke up, his companion died in such a horrible way. Did the experimental subjects come back for revenge? No. They had already left. Lu Dong's eyes became red and bulging because of excessive fear and panic. He was stunned for a few seconds before he rolled out of the tent. Someone died. That blood-curdling scream reverberated throughout the entire campsite. Xiaoqing flipped over in her bed and smirked. She slowly got up and changed her clothes without any hurry. Then, she led her son and a group of friends in the direction of the sound. Lu Dong had been carried up by the paranormals who had heard the commotion. His legs were weak, and he almost lost control of his bowels. To be honest, he had seen countless corpses that were even more terrifying than this one. He had even created many terrifying corpses with his own hands. However, when this corpse became his companion, when his life was also threatened, everything was different. Many people entered the tent and untied the corpses. When they untied the corpses, they realized that the corpses had been hung up with strips of bedsheets. When the corpses were brought out, the faces of the people in charge of the bases were very ugly. The people on night patrol were the best of the best in their bases. However, someone had been killed and tortured to death at that, and the people on night patrol had not noticed at all. It was a slap in the face. One of the people in charge took a deep breath, and then called the people in charge of night patrol over. Did you hear any suspicious sounds or see any suspicious people last night? Chapter 290. They all blushed and shook their heads. As night patrols, they were very serious. They didn't slack off at all. However, someone sneaked in, killed a man, and left without anyone noticing. Should they say that the person was too strong, or that they were too weak? Lu Dong was half broken at the moment. He was being held up, but he was still shouting, "Someone died right next to me. Right next to me. Do you all eat shit?" Someone sneaked in and no one noticed it. You'll only pay attention to it when everyone's head is cut off one day, right? Everyone's face turned pale. After all, the truth was too embarrassing, especially when the body was lying there. They didn't even need to explain. Lu Dong no longer had his usual seriousness and calmness. He jumped up and down and said, "It must be her. She must have colluded with the zombies. She wants to kill me." As he spoke, he pointed at Xiaoqing, his spittle flying far away. Xiaoqing, on the other hand, was very calm. She rolled up her sleeves and said, "You've been slandering me from the beginning. I didn't lower myself to your level because you were overly frightened. I originally thought that after you settled down for a day, you would be able to regain your calmness. I didn't expect that you would still pour dirty water on me. Does that mean that as long as someone dies, it's me who kills them? Does it mean that I colluded with the zombies? If you can't poop, will you blame me for blocking your ass?" Xiaoqing's words were vulgar, but it made many people feel happy. They really hated those who bit people like mad dogs. They didn't know how to look at people's faces. Except for ordering people around, they looked down on others. However, Lu Dong's status was high, so many people didn't dare to provoke him. Xiaoqing's words were exactly what they were thinking. Xiaoqing didn't stop. "According to your theory, if your wife has a baby, it's also mine, right? Why don't you go up to the sky and stand side by side with the sun? Do you want me to send you? Moi." She had a cold expression on her face as she said those sarcastic words in a serious manner. It was actually quite touching. Lu Dong was already on the verge of a mental breakdown, and now he was even more agitated. He pointed at Xiaoqing and shouted, "Is there a second possibility? It's you. It must be you. It must be you and those zombies working together. You and Ying Yi are the same. It's the same. All right, hurry up and bring him to take his medicine." Xiaoqing made a goodbye gesture and said, "You can't stop taking the medicine. Hurry up and feed him the medicine, so that he won't be tormented later." Those paranormals also felt that Xiaoqing was right, so several of them carried Lu Dong away. Even when he was being carried away, Lu Dong was still cursing loudly. The others cleaned up the corpses and other things that needed to be cleaned up. Although they all believed that it wasn't Xiaoqing's doing, it was still very strange after all. They couldn't catch the culprit, so they were also panicked. Who knew who the culprit was? Was it really Lu Dong? Or was it targeting everyone? They couldn't help but panic at such a silent method of killing people. Could it be that the group of high-level zombies had returned? But why did they want to kill Lu Dong? It was like Lu Dong was a delicious cake. They had been besieging him since the beginning. TSK. Those who didn't know better would think that Lu Dong had slept with those zombies' wives. That was why they kept chasing him. Xiaoqing stretched herself and lazily calculated who she should kill next. That was the effect she wanted. She wanted Lu Dong to be terrified and desperate, but there was nothing he could do but watch his death coming. If she let him die so easily, how could she be worthy of those who were used as test subjects and died on the operating table? There were also those pitiful people who were still alive, but could only watch as they turned into monsters. They would rather die a quick death. Chapter 291. She was not a saint, nor an angry youth. Sometimes, when her bottom line was crossed, she could turn into a Shura. A Shura would not win people over with virtue, nor would she influence people with kindness. She would only kill to stop killing. The next person to die had been decided. Xiaoqing took the snacks handed over by Dummy and gnawed on them. Although something like this had happened, they still had to go on. But they sped up their pace on the way back. If they didn't stay in the wild at night and return to the base, they should be fine. They didn't believe that those zombies could chase them to the base and kill them. Lu Dong obviously suffered a big blow. His hair was much whiter. During lunch, he was holding a bowl around the pot. His expression was a little dull. Xiaoqing didn't sympathize with him at all. Was old an excuse to do whatever he wanted? The more he flaunted his seniority, the more Xiaoqing hated him. He was already very old, and should have been more clear-headed. He should have known what he was doing. However, he was the main culprit among the group of beasts. He was the initiator of everything. He was the perpetrator of all evil. Xiaoqing glanced at him. Her eyes became colder. She didn't want to make Lu Dong happy when she was unhappy. So Xiaoqing silently activated the daughter in one of the researchers' bodies. Everyone was eating with their heads lowered, but one of the researchers beside Lu Dong suddenly swelled up like an inflated balloon. Lu Dong accidentally touched him. Like a punctured balloon, the researcher's body quickly exploded. At the moment of explosion, the daughter turned into ashes. There was absolutely no trace left. As the flesh and blood flew and fell to the ground, there was no trace left. Those pieces of flesh fell like rain, falling on Lu Dong's head, body and bowl. He was completely stunned. He looked at the porridge in the bowl that was dyed red by the pieces of flesh. Then he suddenly lay on the ground and began to vomit. He vomited very violently, as if he wanted to vomit out his internal organs. Not only him but the people around him were vomiting too. After all, those pieces of flesh didn't have eyes. Not only did they fall on him, but they also fell on other people. It was just that Lu Dong had more. Imagine, while they were eating, a living person beside them suddenly exploded. Blood, flesh, and bones flew everywhere, and even fell into the bowl. Who wouldn't vomit if it happened to them? Other than vomiting, he was more afraid, especially Lu Dong. He felt like he was going crazy. Death was following him like a shadow, unwilling to let him go for even a moment. He even felt a chill run down his spine, as if the Grim Reaper's scythe was resting on his neck. Lu Dong vomited until he was dizzy, as if he was going to vomit out his internal organs. After he finished vomiting, he lay in the pool of blood with a dull look in his eyes, and did not get up for a long time. If he could still identify Xiaoqing before, what about now? Xiaoqing sat calmly in the distance, eating his meal. However, there was another person beside him who died without an intact body. Most importantly, he didn't even know how that person died. He only saw him suddenly turn into a pile of flesh and blood. And then there wasn't even a corpse left. This was simply too terrifying and too alarming. Could it be that someone could remotely control other people's lives? If that was really the case, wouldn't it be too terrible? Not only Lu Dong was afraid, but more people were also afraid. They were afraid that they would become the next blood fireworks and explode with a crash. Some people even began to quietly stay away from Lu Dong. They finally realized that the thing behind their backs, who they didn't know whether it was a human or a ghost, seemed to be targeting Lu Dong and his survivors. At least, the ones who died so far were the researchers who had been with Lu Dong before, the survivors of this time's incident. As for the others, whether they were ordinary people or superpowered people, they were not affected. They couldn't help but think more about it. However, they were just guessing. Now all of them were in a panic. Everyone was afraid that they would be the next person who suddenly died. No matter what, the base at least had to pretend. After this incident, few people still had the appetite to eat. Only a few people came forward and began to check the bodies. Although it was called a body, in fact, there was only a pile of minced meat left. There were also some bones that were not easy to break, but they were even more broken than the pig bones at the bottom of the soup. Those few people who had probably studied medicine before the doomsday were checking the bodies while retching. If they wanted to find something, at least a big piece of the body, and then check if there were any scars or internal injuries. But when they looked at the ground, the biggest piece was no bigger than a fist. How could they check it? No matter how good a doctor was, it was impossible to find any clues from a pile of minced meat. So, they were actually just going through the motions. After checking the bodies, they all shook their heads. No one found anything. One of the people in charge of the base had to say, "First, help President Liu up. Go and change your clothes. A few people come and clean up the scene." So this person's death could only be left unsettled. What if they didn't find anything? They didn't even know how he died. It couldn't be that he had sat by the fire for too long because of thermal expansion and contraction, right? When Lu Dong was helped up, not only was his hair gray and had lost its luster, but his face was also wrinkled. There was no vitality at all. In the past, although he was old and had wrinkles, he had always been in good spirits. He looked a little younger than his actual age. But now he was so old that he looked like a candle in the wind. It was as if he would die in the next second. After all, he had suffered 2 consecutive blows in one day. Each time, It was his only remaining companion who had died. Their deaths were extremely tragic. It was as if the group of experimental subjects had really come back for revenge. Even if his heart was made of iron, he couldn't take it anymore. Chapter 292. Now there was only one person left, the one he had brought out of the institute. Lu Dong had a hunch that after this person died, it would be his turn. He had never felt so powerless, because he had always been in charge of other people's lives. This was the first time that his life was in someone else's hands. He felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, with the wind blowing behind him, as if it would push him off the cliff in the next second, but it didn't do anything. It made him so scared that sometimes he even thought that it would be better for him to die earlier, so that he wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. However, after the second person died, they arrived at the base. After entering the base, the rescue personnel organized by each base had to withdraw in batches. The rest of the elites were responsible for escorting Lu Dong to the capital. Since they arrived at the base, nothing had happened for a day and a night. Everyone was relieved. Even the person in charge of the base thought that it must be because the base was heavily guarded that those zombies couldn't get in. However, Lu Dong still yelled every day, saying that when he went to bed at night, he felt that someone was squatting at the head of his bed, quietly watching him. However, when he opened his eyes, that person was gone. At first, the person in charge of the base sent people to guard outside the house. He sent a whole team of 20 people to surround the house like an iron bucket. Even a fly or a mosquito couldn't fly in. However, when he got up the next day, Lu Dong still yelled that someone was quietly watching him in front of his bed at night. At that time, the person in charge of the base was a little annoyed. He sped up and sent all the rescue teams back, then gathered a team of superpowered people above level 3, ready to escort Lu Dong out. However, when he took the first step out of the base, the only researcher beside Lu Dong, who was heavily protected, exploded into a mass of bloody fireworks. This time, it was even closer than the last time. When the flesh and blood flew, it covered Lu Dong's entire body. His face and body were covered in sticky flesh and blood. When he breathed, the thick smell of blood wafted into his nose. Lu Dong had completely broken down. No matter what, he refused to leave the base. He looked around at the people protecting him in panic. He felt a cold gaze fall on him. It was filled with malice and murderous intent. It swept past his throat, his heart. When he tried to find that pair of eyes, he couldn't find them. He really broke down. He crawled back to the base and refused to go out again. The person in charge of the base had no choice but to arrange for many people to guard him. In fact, the person in charge was also a little panicked. How did this person die? There were more than 50 level 3 paranormals present. Among them, there was no lack of psychic paranormals with particularly sharp senses. However, none of them had discovered how the researcher had died. Just like that, he exploded into a bloody firework. It was very beautiful. If there was really someone targeting Lu Dong and the others in the dark, that person's strength was definitely very strong. Moreover, everyone began to suspect who had been targeting Lu Dong all this time. If it was like what Lu Dong said, the zombies were here for revenge, then why did the zombies keep chasing him? In theory, even if zombies had a certain level of intelligence, they wouldn't show such a terrifying ability to retaliate. Just like the zombie in the dark, its intelligence was much higher than that of ordinary humans. It had a premeditated plan to retaliate. The second question was, why did the zombies want to take revenge on Lu Dong? Could it be that Lu Dong had done something to make that zombie want to take revenge on him and torture him? Chapter 293. All kinds of questions were lingering in everyone's mind, but no one asked. Lu Dong seemed to have gone crazy. He started to shout whenever he saw someone. There was a zombie chasing after him. The zombie was watching him in the dark, wanting to take revenge on him. In order to make Lu Dong feel at ease, the base arranged several brave paranormals to sleep with Lu Dong at night. If someone really squatted at his bedside and watched him quietly as Lu Dong said, then these paranormals would definitely find out. In the middle of the night, several paranormals were awakened by Lu Dong's scream. Someone. Lu Dong's face was distorted. He grabbed his short gray hair, and his face and eyes were full of horror. Those paranormals were startled. They hurriedly got out of bed, put on a vigilant posture, and turned on the light, but they didn't see anyone. They even searched under the bed, but they didn't even see a footprint, let alone a person. However, Lu Dong insisted that there were people around, and he didn't let them turn off the light. He sat in the corner with the quilt in his arms for the whole night. His spiritual power had been activated until his spiritual power was exhausted. The few paranormals had no choice but to sit with him. But nothing happened for one night, and several nights in a row. They couldn't stand it anymore. They all proposed to change shifts, and the leader of the base completely lost his patience. In his eyes, Lu Dong was now a madman. He didn't know what kind of shameful things he had done. If it weren't for Lu Dong's special identity, he really didn't even want to care about him. So the leader of the base directly refused to see Lu Dong, and just sent someone to take shifts to accompany him at night. Lu Dong was even more desperate. He didn't lie, and he wasn't scared out of his wits. He could clearly feel that someone was standing by his bed every night, looking at him with a bone-chilling gaze. He felt that his eyelids were dead, and he desperately wanted to open his eyes to see what that person looked like, but he couldn't open them. Sometimes he could even feel a cold blade across his neck, leaving a layer of goosebumps on his skin. That feeling was too terrifying. Many times after he woke up, he didn't want to suffer this torture anymore. He wanted to end his own life, but he didn't have the courage. At this moment, Lu Dong realized that he had lived in vain all these years. The older he got, the more he feared death. Even at this stage, he still did not dare to pick up a knife and end his life. When he completely collapsed, he looked at himself in the mirror. His white hair was very messy, and his face was covered in layers of wrinkles. There were also dark circles under his eyes because he had not slept well for a long time. He was so old that he could not recognize him. At this moment, his mind was in a trance. He could even hear countless people demanding his life. The seeds of hatred sprouted in his body and grew continuously, eating away at his internal organs bit by bit. As if he was possessed, he walked to the highest floor of the base and jumped down. Lu Dong died in the middle of the night. The next morning, someone discovered that he had died at the bottom of the building. Because the building was very high, his face was unrecognizable from the fall. Only the wisp of a relieved smile at the corner of his mouth was chilling. Xiaoqing stood outside the crowd and watched for a long time. She only left when the base sent people to collect the body. This time, all the culprits had been executed. She could finally heave a sigh of relief and put down one of her worries. Next, she just needed to send Qin Zishi home. After returning to the temporary residence, Xiaoqing asked someone to call Qin Zishi over. The group had a celebratory feast together, and then Qin Zishi was ready to leave. You're tuning into the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.